number 43, which is to adopt ordinance number 2019-022, approving rezone petition number 19-04 for property located at 851 Albee Farm Road, Nokomis, from OUC to RSF1 and from RSF1 to OUC. And welcome. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Kirk Crane, and I have signed a speaker card. The petition before you is a request to rezone a parcel, parts of a parcel. The parcels are in Nokomis, west of Albee Farm Road and south of Laurel Road. The rezone petition proposes to rezone two small parts, and I emphasize the word parts, of an approximately 9.685 acre parcel in order to build one single-family residence where the applicant would like to build it on a fill area adjoining Shackett Creek. The applicant is proposing to rezone approximately 0.737 acres of a fill area from OUC, open use conservation, 1 unit per 25 acres, to RSF1, which is residential single family, 2.5 units per acre, in order to build one single family residence on the property. The applicant also intends to rezone approximately 0.83 acres closer to Albee Farm Road from RSF1 to OUC, in what the applicant is referring to as a revision to the zoning. As you can see, there's the parcels shown here. There are 3 zoning districts on the property. RSF1, most of that is located close to Albee Farm Road. Then much of the property is zoned OUC, and then you have MP, which is Marine Park, where basically the flow of Shackett Creek is located. These are the 2 parcels that are shown on the approximately 9.65 acre property. And the one closest to Albee Farm Road, this is Laurel Road up here. This is Albee Farm Road. This parcel is the one they're proposing to rezone to OUC. This is the fill area that they would like to build a single family residence on, and that's the 0.737 acre area that they want to build a single family residence adjoining Shackett Creek. The subject property, so this is the existing zoning. I want to show you this is the area that is proposed to the RSF1. This is the area that is existing RSF1 that they want to rezone to OUC. So existing zoning, and this is the proposed zoning on the right. And they're calling it a revision. The subject property is designated moderate density residential, which is defined as greater than or equal to 2 to less than 5 units per acre. It's shown by the yellow color on the future land use map. The requested area to be rezoned to RSF1 is consistent with the moderate density future land use designation. As you can see, everything on that map there, again, Laurel Road up here, Albee Farm Road right here, and everything on that map is designated moderate density residential on the future land use map. Subject property is zoned RSF1 in the eastern portion of the property. As you can see, the parcel's outlined, that's shown by the yellow color, and that's through much, and then OUC through much of the rest of the property, and then there is some MP, which is Marine Park, where Shackett Creek, and that's actually the flow of Shackett Creek, and the requested RSF1 on the fill area adjoining Shackett Creek is an implementing district in the moderate density future land use designation. Again, showing you the 2 areas they want to rezone. Again, these are parts of a 9.65 acre parcel. They're small parts of it, this being 0.737 acres, this being approximately 0.83 acres. And they're calling it a revision, basically rezone this to RSF1, rezone this to OUC. And get 2 different versions there. This is looking south along Albee Farm Road, just south of Laurel Road. The subject property is on the right, gives you an idea that Laurel Road is a 4-lane divided road at that point with sidewalk on the western side of the property. Give you some other views. This is looking at the bridge across Shackett Creek on Laurel Road, give you an idea what Laurel Road is at that point. Again, that's a little north of where the subject property is, but just gives you an idea what Laurel Road is. Those are the two major streets. This is looking from the back of one of the lots south of the subject property at Shackett Creek. And the area where they're proposing to build the house or the single-family residence is up in this area. And that's a fill area. We're not sure where that fill came from. May have come from when they widened Laurel Road, but basically it's a fill area, it's an upland. This is looking west across the property from Albee Farm Road. You see much of the property, of course, is impacted by Shackett Creek. It's a lot of wetlands there. Obviously, you've got Shackett Creek and then much of the impact of Shackett Creek on the property. And again, looking east from the property along Albee Farm Road, you can see what some of the wetlands look like. This is looking across the Shackett Creek from the west, looking at the subject property, which is back here. And then you can see Shackett Creek. This is a private boat ramp joining a single-family residence in that subdivision to the west. And then this is looking south from along Shackett Creek from the Laurel Road Bridge. Subject property would be off here in the distance, the area they want to rezone to RSF1. Kind of give you an idea of what it is. What you're looking at is most of the vacant property. It's all vacant right now, much of it's wetlands. The applicant's proposing to develop this one single-family residence on that 0.737 acre fill area on the edge of Shackett Creek. The applicant intends to rezone the fill area from OUC to RSF1. That will enable him to build a single-family residence basically on that western area that's highlighted, crosshatched there. And then in exchange, or as they're proposing to rezone the area over here closer to Albee Farm Road to OUC, the slightly negligibly larger area, 0.737 acres, 0.83 acres over here. And the applicant's also proposing to rezone those two pieces of property, which are part of this 9.65 acre property. Much, if not all, of the area proposed to be rezoned to OUC is wetlands. The fill area where the applicant intends to build the single-family residence is usable. The area proposed to be rezoned to OUC along Albee Farm Road is wetland and mangrove.
Mr. Crane, can you hold 1 second?
Yes, sir.
We're having a feedback problem.
Okay, I'm sorry. Maybe I'll stand back from the...
No, I don't think it's you. Okay, continue, please.
Okay. Where the fill area where the applicant intends to build the single-family residence is usable. The area proposed...
Mr. Crane, sorry, your mic's off.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Can you turn it on, please?
Jason, you got a portable maybe?
Or I can talk louder.
Just pause for 1 minute. The folks in the back can't hear.
Okay, I'm sorry. Work out the technical problems yet.
You need a break?
Okay,
Mr.
I'll
Crane,
try and
let's
speak.
just wait 1 minute. Let me
Wait,
see if
I'll
they can
wait.
get you a quick
Yes, sir.
correction to this. If not, okay, go ahead, try it.
Okay. Testing, is the microphone on? You got it? Okay, good. They corrected it. Thank you. Much of the area proposed to be rezoned to OUC is wetlands. This area over here where the RSF1 zoning exists is mostly wetland. And the fill area where the applicant intends to build the single-family residence is usable. The area proposed to be rezoned to OUC along Albee Farm Road is wetland and mangrove tidal marsh and is not usable for a residence without significant mitigation. So what they're trying to do is this area over here that was RSF1, as you saw in the existing and proposed zoning, it's almost all wetland and mangrove tidal marsh. And this is fill area over here. So they want to build where the fill area is, not where the wetland is. That's actually a little better for the environment than less environmental impact. The non-binding development concept plan shows the area to be rezoned from OUC to RSF1 and from RSF1 to OUC. The single-family residence will be required to meet the standards of the RSF1 zone district. It will be required to be built with livable floor area that is above flood elevation. The driveway access to the single-family residential site is proposed to be 10 feet wide from Albee Farm Road, basically coming in off of Albee Farm out to that site that's 0.737 acres. The driveway will require additional fill and will be required to obtain a Water and Navigational Control Act, WNCA permit. That's actually the next item on the agenda right after this. The proposed driveway access will cross a portion of the property zoned OUC. The driveway access will be required to minimize impact to water flow in Shackett Creek. Okay. The areas to the east, west, and south are developed residential lots around Shackett Creek. The applicants are proposing to build one single-family residence on the property. Realistically, that's about all they can get on that 0.737 acres. And that it actually borders Shackett Creek and does not adjoin other single-family residences in the area. The requested RSF1 rezone is of a size and shape that will accommodate one single-family residence that meets the standards of the zone change in the zone district. The slightly larger portion of the property to the eastern area along Albee Farm Road that is more able to be developed is being requested to be rezoned OUC, which will preserve that wetland portion of the property. Again, so this is the proposed rezoning, right where the fill is right here, and actually the fill comes all the way up to here, but that's on the adjoining property to the north, which is also owned by the same owners of this property, and was included in the original application that was seen by the Planning Commission, both the parcel up to Laurel Road and the southern parcel, but they have modified the application and included only the southern parcel right now. And they thought that was confusion because there was a lot of RSF1 shown by the yellow color up there near the intersection of Albee Farm Road and Laurel Road. So they've included this line across the top of those two properties is the northern boundary of the southern of the two properties, which is the only one included in this application. And again, this area that is RSF1, mostly wetlands and mangrove tidal marsh, the area where the RSF1 that's proposed is fill area. And so they're simply trying to build on the fill area. There are access to the property, again, will be off of Albee Farm Road by that 10-foot wide driveway, and it's going to require a WNCA permit for development. There are no stipulations recommended by the reviewing agencies nor by the Planning Commission. In summary, this is a rezone of parts of a 9.685 acre property, 0.737 acre area, which is the fill, to be zoned to RSF1 in order to build one single family residence, and then parts of a 0.83 acre property from RSF1 to OUC, which is the wetlands area. Again, the RSF1 zoning district does not require a binding development concept plan. There are no stipulations recommended by the reviewing agencies. And I believe the applicant is willing to consider a stipulation that would state that there would be only one single-family residence built on this entire parcel. And I'll leave that up to them to proffer that if they so choose, but I've discussed that with them. We did receive, since yesterday morning, 28 emails, which I know many of you were copied on. I've given a copy to the clerk, and they are double-sided and printed and put into the record by me right now. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try and answer some of them.
Commissioner Mayo.
Yeah, I got a question for Josh. Help me with this in a word. Well, maybe it's 4 words. What is going on? If we vote on number 43, and let's just imagine, we haven't heard the full testimony yet. I don't need a lecture from anybody about that. If this were to be voted on no, do we even hear 44? That's now question number 1. And to your recollection, or maybe planning staff, have we ever swapped stuff like this out before?
I'm not aware of the county ever swapping stuff out, but that would be a question for staff
Okay.
to ask them. Regarding the steps, this board is sitting here, considering the rezoning. The next one is this board sitting as the WNCA, so it's a different board. So, whatever
Okay.
happens with this one, I think it's a separate item than the next item.
Okay. Thank you.
And the applicants are referring to this as what they call a revision in the zoning. And I know the applicant's going to get into that as part of his presentation. Simply, the area that is owned RSF1 is mostly wetlands and mangrove tidal marsh. The area that's currently OUC, well, it has that fill area in it, and that's the more buildable area. If they were to build where the RSF1 zoning is right now, they would have significant environmental impacts, and it would require quite a bit of mitigation. So that's their point.
Can I, Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Commissioner Mayo.
Can I have Michelle Norton or somebody from planning come up? Or Matt, I can't see who's behind the post.
To give staff a little time for preparation here is we'll take some questions of staff before the applicant comes about. We're going to take a break here to get this audio because I don't know if people can hear. It's my understanding it's going live into the
It's
clerk.
working and it's going out over the system, Chair. He is having to balance the 3 set of speakers in here right now. So some of the mics project more internally, but they're all being recorded.
Okay. Okay.
We can take-
My biggest concern, the clerk, you're hot. The mics are hot on your stuff. Okay.
Let's just to make sure. Let's take a minute. Let's take 5 minutes.
Okay. Let's take a break now. Thanks. an extra minute? Okay. We're live. All right, while we're waiting, I guess apparently the attorney needs an extra minute here. We are having an audio difficulty, but it's my understanding it's just in the chamber here. The clerk can hear, and it's coming in through the electronic systems for recording purposes. It's my understanding out to the public, the TV, internet, and various social media that it's just fine, I guess. If anybody hears anything different than that, I'll need to know immediately. But it's my understanding it's just the acoustics in this room. We're not getting the appropriate feedback up here, but obviously we can hear just fine for the testimony. We've got staff in the back that if it's just getting to be too burdensome, they'll give me a signal, I guess, in the back. But I would encourage anybody, obviously with social distancing, if you can scoot up or if you need to hear, make arrangements. And again, keeping social distancing in mind. I'm not totally sure about any overflow room in the back, but I'm assuming that feedback is going to be fine there. They turned down the speakers in this room just so we would have no feedback and people can hear appropriately. So with that, did you have something, Michelle, that you need to address? Yep. Yes.
I don't know why I
Josh.
clicked that. So I would just like to make sure that the applicant is okay with us moving forward with the sound issues, make sure they can hear everything. And so I think it would be at this point advantageous to have the applicant come up and ask them how they feel, if they want to move forward with the hearing with the sound issues, or if they want to go ahead and continue it. But since it's the applicant and it's their hearing today, I want to make sure they have all the rights that they need and want.
Very reasonable. The applicant, please welcome. Come on up. No, come on. Welcome. It's my understanding all the microphones are hot and we can hear you just fine, but I don't know if you had a chance to hear Mr. Moyer, but we want to make sure that you have the appropriate forum to have a public hearing on this. It's my understanding that we can all hear you. Again, it's just the acoustics in this room and everything, again, is being recorded, so hopefully you're comfortable with that. If not, please say so.
I was under the impression, I thought I heard Mr. Ziegler say he had a hard time hearing the last speaker.
Just, you come up to your mic.
So the mic is actually working, correct? Just not in here?
Yes, it's my understanding, what I'm being told is that, for example, the clerk is recording just fine. It's just actually the speakers in this room that they've turned down to try and avoid the feedback, given all the Zoom callers that are on here.
All right.
So,
Mr. Ziegler, would you prefer that the staff give the presentation again so you could hear it more clearly, or do you feel you
No,
got the gist of it?
I could hear the staff. My challenge was with the county administrator, but I think he was kind of he was talking a little bit lower than he normally
Okay.
does.
Well, let's put it this way. A lot of the folks in the room are here to support my petition, and I want everybody to be able to hear that clearly, as well as the emails that came in. So I will just ask everybody to please speak nice and loud for the commissioners, and then everything will be fine. Thank
Yeah,
you.
just to be clear, I heard you very clearly there.
Thank you.
welcome. Thank you. Okay, with that, then, unless you had, Josh, unless you had any different thoughts, I'm going to let the applicant begin their presentation.
Yep.
Okay,
Will be
any further
appropriate.
questions for staff before I let the applicant go forward? Okay, we'll recognize the applicant here, and you'll be recognized for 20 minutes. So, welcome. You're recognized for 20 minutes, sir, and the clock is right there for you to judge your time.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is John Koda. I have signed a speaker card. My role here today is going to be just for a few minutes. I'm going to just serve as a sort of master of ceremonies and introduce some people. I've been a local business lawyer here and resident of Sarasota County for 30 years, worked with the Boone Law Firm in Venice and now with Brick Business Law. Privileged to represent Erica and Naheem Ginsberg and to consider them friends besides. And I know our time's limited, but we have kind of pared this down so that we know where we're going with this. So they've asked me to take a few minutes or a minute or two just to tell you a little bit about them, as I think the sometimes adversarial nature of these proceedings has left many with some misleading ideas about who they are and what they stand for. So they've been residents here for 15 years. Naheem is a software engineer. Erica I call a Renaissance woman. She's has varied talents and interests these days, primarily as a local entrepreneur and a substitute teacher. They have three great kids. I know them all. Antonia is close friends with my daughter. Both of them graduated together from Pineview. She coaches at Sarasota Crew, volunteers at Moat Marine. She's studying marine engineering at New College. Son Ari graduated from Pineview, had just started studying biology and art, and youngest daughter Maeva, who I think you're going to hear from today, is also an avid rower there. She was born in slip P7 of the Longboat Key moorings, by the way. So my clients wanted you all to know that. So I'm not sure what public comment will imply about the Ginsberg-Klemmt today. I did see some of the emails that circulated, but I can assure you that they're not here to seek permission to build within or otherwise harm Florida wetlands. I think the theory here is that they want to reassure the public and the commission, who may have questions, that they want nothing more than the right to place a modest, sustainable, single-family home on a small upland portion of this unique property situated so there's no impact or very little impact on environmentally sensitive wetlands. I'm going to introduce the team that they put together. Phil Browse Sr. Is an environmental specialist for Sarasota County, or was an environmental specialist for Sarasota County before going on to Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission and then on to Charlotte County. He's an experienced manager, consultant for preserves, conservation areas, environmental parks from 30 to 3,000 acres. His experience has been in ecosystem restoration and management, often but not always with endangered species. He's a native of this area, knows the local ecology well, and since the 70s, he, like many of us, has witnessed the sometimes difficult and contentious tug-of-war between development and conservation and seeking to find the balance on behalf of concerned public. Mr. Jonathan Cole is a principal of Giffords Webster Engineers and has extensive experience in designing stormwater sewer systems and septic tank replacement projects for and in Sarasota County. Commissioner Mayo mentioned the WNCA permit of the project that's set to be heard after this one, and Mr. Cole would be the leading presenter for that major work permit and will be available to answer questions regarding drainage and driveway safety, including the culvert crossing. In a minute, you're going to hear from Mr. Jono Miller. I've just recently become acquainted with him, and for those of you who do not yet have the privilege, let me just take a last minute to introduce him. He came to Sarasota as a student, and I like this part. Today is literally the 50th anniversary of his arrival in Florida, September 9th. 5 years after that, he and his wife started a local environmental consulting partnership. They wrote the original habitat descriptions in the county comprehensive plan and were hired no fewer than 4 times to map habitats in the county. Sarasota County gave him the county's Conservation Lifetime Achievement Award 15 years ago. He's been appointed and reappointed to county advisory boards 12 times, and the first county advisory board group he was appointed to tried to save these very wetlands 40 years ago. Now he's back trying again, and he'll tell you this, he's not being compensated for his time like I am here today. He's here because he thinks this is a good thing for the community and particularly for the Shackett Creek area. So I've seen his presentation, and you will hear in a moment. I think everyone should pay close attention, not just those who are interested in Shackett Creek, but all environmentally sensitive lands in Sarasota County. And with that, I would turn it over to Mr. Jono Miller. Thank you. And I'll be back for a minute after.
Thank you, sir. While they're sanitizing the microphone, they'll do that between each speakers. Mr. Koda, if you mentioned you're going to be master of ceremonies, I just want to be conscious of the time. Use 25 minutes of your time for 25% of your time in intros. So just, if you can keep me on task, I'd really appreciate it. Welcome, Mr. Miller.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I'm clicking what I believe is the play button on this video, and okay. So let me see. I don't know if I can go back. Let me stop for a second. So as you heard, I came here 50 years ago. I've been studying the local environment. I get a lot of questions from people, and I try to help people out. And sometimes I can and sometimes I can't. Last August, I was contacted by a couple who said they were trying to do the right thing, but people weren't listening to them. So I agreed to meet with them. They told me they bought a piece of land with high ground, but the county was forcing them to build in wetlands. That seemed really unlikely to me. I also learned that 501 people had signed an online petition opposing their project, and to make matters worse, the Planning Commission had voted 7-0 to recommend denial. I told them I'd look into it, but I'd only help them on 2 conditions. The first is that whatever they were proposing had to have a net benefit for the environment, which shouldn't surprise you. But the second was that they couldn't pay me. Commissioners, I'm retired. I only work on things that interest me and where I think I can make a difference. And I have in the past seen consultants whose convictions have been purchased. And I wanted you and the citizens that live along Shackett Creek to understand that what I'm about to tell you is unencumbered by any expectation of income. So what are we talking about this afternoon? Three things. We're trying to help solve a dilemma that you share with the owners that affirm their right to build a home and to try and save some property that I first tried 40 years ago, as you heard. Now, the numbers are very straightforward. The owners want to reduce the amount of RSF1 and increase the amount of OUC. The staff report acknowledges that the area next to the road consists entirely of environmentally sensitive tidal marsh, wetland, and mangrove. And you can see the estuarine and intertidal wetlands in this image from the National Wetlands Inventory. Here's a county map from your staff that shows wetlands tinted pale green. Now, what does this actually look like on the ground? This is black needle rush marsh. This is the majority of the wetlands on the site. It's a fairly rare habitat in the county. As you move closer to Albee Farm Road, you find this mixture of black needle rush, mangrove, and salt-tolerant plants, and there are some of the plants. Now, I've added a blue tint to this image to show you the area that should be zoned OUC, open use conservation. And that's because that's what the comprehensive plan says about OUC. But there's a problem because not all the wetland is zoned OUC. In fact, a little more than 4/5 of an acre is now zoned RSF1, residential single family, so telling the owners to build their home there. This graphic shows where I waited on the site, basically everywhere, walked and waited everywhere in the RSF1 that wasn't dense mangrove. Now, part of my research on this situation, I watched the Planning Commission testimony and read the comments of some of the people that submitted along with the online petition. I learned three things. First, neighbors are concerned there may be an attempt to build more than one home, that they're very concerned about the condition of Shackett Creek, and many people who commented on the petition want to save wetlands. Now, one explanation for the concern about multiple homes is that this property has a future land use designation of moderate density residential, which is more than 2 and less than 5 units per acre. I'm here to tell you, and you heard this from staff, they will confirm it, they only want to build one home. Now, I don't blame anyone who is concerned about the status of Shackett Creek. In fact, I think a case can be made that Shackett Creek may be our county's most abused creek. And the reason for that is if you look at the early maps from Sarasota County, Cowpen Slough originally flowed to the Maca River, and apparently sometime in the 1950s, agricultural landowners dreamed up a way to divert it to the coast via Shackett Creek. And as a result, in 1961, the Cowpen Slough project was approved. A month later, it was being challenged by people in the Nokomis and Venice area. And by 1971, 10 years later, it was a complete environmental disaster with rotting hydrilla, dead fish, and a dead cow floating downstream. One report said it had increased the watershed 15 times. Public outrage led to the forming of the Donna and Roberts Bay Environmental Society, which led to a county-funded study that was completed in '75. And there's Darby's, and there's my friend Jim Jones, who was a leader in that organization. Now, what did that study find? They found that the marshes had been replaced by home sites. I'll wait till it catches up here. But in a very particular way, and that is that the dredged spoil wasn't placed on uplands, but instead it was placed in a manner to surround the wetlands that remained. And that practice isolated the remaining wetlands with berms of, or rings of dredged fill. Now, why would anyone do that, isolate them with a ring of dredged fill? Well, in 1948, things looked pretty good in this area, but by 1957, several projects were underway to create new land for subdivisions, and that's how things were done then. You dredged up a perimeter berm to surround mangroves or salt marsh, and then when you had a chance to come back and fill in behind them, it would create buildable lots, and that's how Shackett Island and waterfront estates were created. And somebody tried that on this parcel, but for whatever reason, they failed. When that form of development ended, about 40 acres of wetland had been permanently lost between Laurel Road and the railroad. But I want to be really clear that the people that are currently living along Shackett Creek had nothing to do with this. they're faultless. They weren't the people filling the wetlands 3/4 of a century ago. But once that land was dredged up, it didn't make a lot of sense to call it a conservation area. Now, the 1975 study that I alluded to used red ink to depict how much of Shackett Creek had been impacted by the Cowpen Slough project, the Intracoastal Waterway, and residential development. And the third thing that I learned is that a lot of people that signed the petition don't want the wetlands destroyed. And how do I know that? Because of what they said. And let's review. Protecting the wetlands, save the wetlands and waterways, save the wetlands, save the planet, keep our wetlands intact. Land designated as sensitive or wetland must be preserved. Natural wetlands, we need to protect our wetlands. We need to preserve all the wetland we can. Environmental sensitive land should be protected. Keep sensitive wetlands, natural environmentally sensitive land and waterways, save the waterways for wildlife in the future. You get the picture here. The people that were signing this online petition have been led to believe that this project was going to reduce the extent of wetlands rather than increase it or protect it. Bottom line, there's a bunch of these things, but it goes on for a while. But the bottom line is, yeah, we agree, let's protect the wetlands. So how did it come to pass that we ended up in this situation? How did the county end up making wetlands RSF? And part of the explanation can be traced to 2006, when the then zoning administrator for the county wrote to local attorney Bill Merrill, and here's the letter, it's in your packet. In the letter, she states the configuration of the property is important. You are proposing 2 dwelling units on the upland portion. It included a map, and the map shows that the so-called upland portion was actually the area we all know as wetland. That created a problem. So before this rezoning proposal came along, the county faced a dilemma, and it shares it with the owners. And here's the dilemma. The county either had to enforce the comprehensive plan mandate to preserve mangroves and tidal marsh, which would in effect deny reasonable use of the properties, even though it has RSF zoning, or force the owners to develop in the wetlands, which was going to further reduce wetlands along Shackett Creek, ignore the comprehensive plan, as well as the wishes of the property owners and the petition signers. Now let's turn to what's called a LiDAR image. This doesn't show vegetation or land cover, but rather elevation. You can see the extensive blue-green wetlands, but you can also see a higher red-orange land next to the creek. And that land is just as high as the subdivision to the south. And staff acknowledges that this high land is different than the other OUC on the property, and that other OUC is wetland. So let's take a look at this land. The proposal involves using the 1957 dredged ring and fill for driveways so they can get to the higher and wider area. And when you go out there, you'll find there's some cabbage palms and some oaks, but this would be more accurately called an arboretum of invasive species. And this is what it looks like out there. So on the way out, you go through a big area of Australian pine, which you all know is a problematic invasive plant. This is carrotwood that wasn't a problem 50 years ago when I got here, but actually invades areas with Brazilian pepper. Here's albizia. This is the non-native lantana. It's pretty, but it's very invasive. There's some cactus growing out there that suggests the height. There's a lot of Brazilian pepper, but most of what's growing out there is complete invasive junk. So I think you can see where this is headed. The wetlands that are now zoned RSF1 should have been zoned OUC, and the dredged up man-made spoil berm that was created specifically to facilitate development should be RSF1. Now, I told you I wasn't going to get involved. I told the owners I wouldn't get involved unless the proposal resulted in an improved environment. And here are the facts. We're looking at a net increase in OUC zoning, and who does that? I don't know. Removing the threat of development from 4/5 of an acre of wetland, removing 6 species of the worst invasive plants in the state of Florida, which I estimate to cover 3/4 of an acre, and ending up with over 92% of the parcel either in Marine Park or OUC zoning. And I don't know where else you can find that in Sarasota County. Now, this is what staff had to say about the impacts on coastal habitats. The project has demonstrated a significant reduction in impacts to these native habitats in comparison to the potential development impacts to the area of the property currently zoned as RSF. Now, commissioners, In recent years, you've made some decisions to partially rectify some of the insults to Shackett Creek. You purchased the Pocono Trails Preserve. You've created the Legacy Trail, which is a great contribution. You purchased 168 acres between Fox Creek and Cowpen Slough, and you're willing to buy more. And as was discussed this morning, you have embarked on a very ambitious project to partially correct the mistake that was made when Cowpen Slough was diverted into Shackett Creek. And this was alluded to in the morning's discussion, Phase 3. Now, can more be done to help Shackett Creek? Absolutely. There are other lands along Shackett Creek that could still be protected. And so-called water goats could deal with the floating debris in the stormwater. But I've looked at the rest of the agenda, and there's nothing like that today. The only thing you can do today to improve Shackett Creek is to correct a decades-old zoning error, thereby permanently protecting these wetlands and banishing a forest of invasive plants. And today's question is this: how often can you solve a dilemma, honor property rights, and improve the environment in one action? And with that, I will turn it back to John Koda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Commissioner Mayo.
Jono, how are you?
Fantastic.
We got to know each other for a long time.
It's true.
This may be a question for the next petition.
Okay.
But they'll access this spoiled island,
Mm-hmm.
whatever you'd want to call it, through a driveway.
Uh-huh.
But it looks on their aerials like they'll have to build some bridges. Is that for the next
Yes,
permit?
yes. So you have a separate matter coming up after this that deals with the access, the design and construction of that, the impacts to the wetland, the culvert, and all that stuff. And it's hard to completely tease them apart. They're obviously related to each other, but to the extent possible, we should probably talk about that in
Okay.
that permit
Yeah, that's
and
that.
deal with the actual rezoning of the land at this time.
All right,
That's
fine.
my opinion. You
That's
guys get to
fine.
decide.
That's fine.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you again. I will only be a minute more. In conclusion, Commissioners, my clients are here with palms extended in a good faith effort to do what they truly believe is the right thing for everyone concerned today. You heard Jono talk about the big picture of this process. Unfortunately, as is often the case in these matters, the representations to the public about this petition have been fraught with inaccuracies at times. The reason they hired me originally, my clients, is with respect to this property, was to have to send a cease and desist to a neighboring owner who was disseminating some misleading information. Since then, they've had to spend an inordinate amount of time and money to inform the neighboring owners and everyone who's concerned about local land conservation about what this rezoning petition is meant to accomplish and what it is not meant to accomplish. And I think Mr. Miller explained that better than anyone else could ever encapsulate it. So I'm not what people commonly refer to as a dirt lawyer, but I do know that if the ultimate decision here is to deny development for any use for any purpose on this property through this proceeding or subsequent proceedings, that's, my clients are going to have to look at a legal issue based on the takings clause. But leaving that aside, leaving things as they stand now maintains the strange situation where we have many concerned members of the public pleading with you to protect the wetlands in a situation where our clients are seeking to do exactly that by what we see as a surgical, sensible alteration of the zoning code to allow modest development on a portion of the uplands of this property and adding the necessary reciprocal protections to a portion of the wetlands on the property currently zoned for development. County staff has opined in its own reports that, quote, this approach provides a better environmental outcome than what currently exists on the parcels today, unquote. And Mr. Miller dovetailed with his analysis of that as well. So our position is if the overriding goal of everyone concerned here today is to protect Florida wetlands, then we respectfully suggest that this should not be a difficult decision. So that concludes our presentation. I do have some hard copies of the presentation that Mr. Miller just went through with the important slides. I don't know if it would be appropriate to hand that out to someone to disseminate to the commissioners.
Yep, you can get it to the clerk and they'll get it over to us. Thank you, sir. I appreciate your respect in the time allocation on this. We do have a question, Commissioner Hines, and then Commissioner Mayor, are you on the, Commissioner Hines, hold on one second. Commissioner Mayor, were you on the board here? Okay, then we're not going to use the electronic board here. It doesn't seem to be working, so just raise your hand. So Commissioner Hines.
Yeah, Mr. Koda, quick question. So, such a small piece of property, and I'm, looking at the property appraisers, and it looks, your folks bought this from a tax sale deed, and that's irrelevant, doesn't matter. But you put up a letter that was written to Mr. Merrill, but how do you get 3 zoning designations on one small piece of property that is pretty much all wetland? How'd that occur?
How did that occur? I don't know. Perhaps Mr. Miller can opine to that better than I can. He's the one who kind of researched the history of that.
Because your linchpin on this is that there's an RSF1 on a wetland. How do you get Marine Park, and it's not OUE, OUC, how's there 3 of them on one piece?
Okay, so the marine park makes sense, right? Because it's open water. Does that
Well, that's
follow?
kind of I guess on the picture, it looks like it's still part of the wetland part.
Well, we don't. That's unusual. Okay, the open water of the creek that they have title to the creek bottom, and that makes sense that would be marine park. I think.
Okay.
It seems
So
sensible.
they own into Shackett.
Yes, they have. Yes,
Okay.
and so so now we're counting for the rest of the property. Historically, and I tried to, there's material in your packet that goes through all this, but I'll make it brief. Historically, there was tidal marsh, and then there was a salt flat, a barren white area that shows up very white in the 1948 aerial. And somebody, for some reason, assumed that was an upland and coded as upland, and everything landward of waterward of that, they coded as mangrove. Now, if you look at the soil survey, it's coded as tidal marsh. And of course, after 1957, it was a spoil bank. So if you look at a variety of county documents, you see everything to the west as being mangrove, when in fact there was a lot of upland created by people. And if you look, and then the salt flat got coded as upland. And so, as you saw in that letter from the zoning administrator, it shows up as being coded for RSF1. It was a mistake somebody made decades ago. Nobody caught it, and it's just a situation that's unfortunate. And you guys, the county has taken a position that we're supposed to preserve and enhance tidal flats, which this is, and salt marsh and mangroves. And so it's just an awkward, unfortunate situation. I don't know if that little booklet has the image of that, but does that help?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand a little bit about the title to the property and how this, I guess, it began in some private ownership versus the state and those types of things, and then that upland. So, yeah, you answered it, and I think it's just a bigger question that I have that maybe I can get my head around as we continue the hearing.
All right. Well, thanks for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any further questions for staff or the applicant? Commissioner Mayo.
Yeah, the link between the two, I'll probably break it again, but if the applicant is done, are you done, John? Yes. Maybe I could have Howard Berna up here. Howard, you may just tell me that these questions are just for the next petition, and that's fine. But does this seem as logically put by the petitioner that this was a decades-old mapping mistake that then just got put into zoning districts inappropriately? Does that make sense?
It does. I think Mr. Miller explained it very well in the time that he was allotted. It does make sense in the context that there is a better environmental outcome for what is being proposed today than what could be brought in tomorrow for a building permit on the current RSF district. There's actually less wetland impact with the rezoning of this property.
Okay, at least give me, because we know each other for a long time, that this is counterintuitive, and it's just odd to me.
Well, I'll talk a little bit more when we get to the next item. I'll
Okay.
have some other items to share with you, but it is a better environmental outcome
Okay.
when you look at the square footage of impacts that could be done versus what is being proposed, and you'll hear more about in the next presentation.
Okay, thank you, Howard.
Okay, any further questions of staff or the applicant?
This wise up here.
Sure.
So Howard, this is gonna be, there's enough upland out there to get a septic tank permit? And you're gonna have a well out there? I mean, I know it's a rezone, but
I don't believe there was plans for a well or septic. I thought, and maybe
We're
the
gonna run
petitioners
county-
can speak to that issue, how they would connect to sewer line along Albee Farm.
okay.
Okay.
Maybe we'll get that in the rebuttal, if
Yeah.
that's part of their building plan.
Commissioner Mayo?
I don't mean to, thank you, Howard. This will let you off the hook here. They still had 44 seconds left. Is it appropriate for me to ask the petitioners how they're going to serve the water and sewer?
Sure, we're.
In the
questions of-
45 seconds, or Jono, or somebody? You still had time left.
Yep, staff and applicant, questions are fine with me right now before we get into public comment, that'd be fine.
Everything's coming in, water, sewer, and power. They're not going to have a well and septic tank.
Okay. Thank you.
36 seconds.
Yeah, you still got 36 seconds.
All right, anything further of staff or the applicant? Okay, great, we have a number of public comment cards and some remote online. Let's start with the remote online, starting with Antonia Ginsberg-Klemmt. Can you hear me okay? Are you online? Antonia Ginsberg-Klemmt? Okay,
they're
we'll
not
move
online.
on to Mr. Glenn Bruno. Mr. Glenn Bruno, are you on the line? Mr. Glenn Bruno, are you on the line? We'll go next to Joe Martini. Mr. Martini, are you on the line? Mr. Joe Martini? Mr. Martini?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me
Can you
okay,
hear me, sir? I'm talking through the, it looks like it's going through.
Yeah, staff, we need it turned up. The speakers in the chamber here, we need turned up. Mr. Martini, if you can hear us, give us a second here. We're trying to turn up the speakers here in the chambers.
Certainly.
You're fired.
The first two are not online, just give them a second on this one.
Okay. Mr. Martini, just hang on a minute more, okay?
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Mayo.
Just so everybody knows, back in the back, you can hear perfectly. So if any of us step back there, nothing's being lost.
Mr. Martinez, can you give us a mic check, please?
Joe Martini, mic check. My speaker's on. Hello?
Mr. Martini,
Yes.
we can hear you, but it's very faint, so just one more minute here, okay?
Now it's a bit closer.
Oh, now you sound perfect, so,
Is that better? I've got my face right on the screen almost, so
yeah,
I'll
that's,
try to read.
that's great.
Is that better?
It is, very much so. You're recognized, sir. You have 5 minutes to talk, like with about a minute left. If it's okay, I'll interrupt you and tell you got about a minute left, okay?
I appreciate that. I have a timer.
You're recognized, sir, for 5 minutes.
Commissioners, thank you so much. The planning commissioners unanimously recommended to deny this petition based on these findings of fact. The petition would not be consistent with the intent, goals, objectives, policies, guidelines, principles, and programs of the comprehensive plan. The proposed change would not be compatible with the existing land use patterns, nor with designated future land use. The proposed change will adversely influence living conditions in the neighborhood. Whether gradual and ordered growth contemplated in the comprehensive plan cannot be best accomplished through the approval of this land use in which is less than the intensity designated by the future land use of the comprehensive plan. There are not substantial reasons why the property cannot be used in accordance with its existing zoning. The property change would create adverse impacts in the adjacent area or county in general. I am here today asking that the above-mentioned petition 1904 to request a zoning swap from OUC to RSF1 be denied. If approved, the petitioner will be granted an additional OUC property not currently listed in their swap calculation. This land will be taken for the driveway to gain access to the OUC zoned island at the west side of the property abutting Shackett Creek. This grant will add an addition of roughly 0.87 of an acre, nearly an acre of parcel, not included in their calculations as part of the overall swap of zone lands. I do have images that I submitted in my email. I'm not sure if you can see them. I took measurements from the Sarasota County GIS system. As well, the additional area includes nearly 1,200 feet linear of mature mangrove strands and wetland that would be subject to destruction due to construction activities, installation of the driveway, utilities, and the infrastructure, permanent infrastructure of a proposed culvert bridge directly in Shackett Creek. A marine park is contained within the property and accessed via kayak through that eastern southern cut between the OUC zone South Peninsula and the OUC zone West Island. If approved, the petitioner plans to add a culvert bridge to span from the island to the zone Peninsula OUC to the OUC zone West Island. This infrastructure is said to have bars to impede manatee egress and egress through the cut, and as such, it will most certainly impede other wildlife. This infrastructure will too impede public access via kayak to the marine park located through the cut, along with the Shackett Creek. To note, this area of the marine park is actually highlighted in a publication published by Sarasota County Parks, Recreation, and Natural Resources Blue Waves Paddling Guide. See pages 26 through 29. It is part of the Donna Bay Trail Shackett Creek route. It is recommended that while kayaking, you explore the black little salt marsh located through that cut. These are truly important areas and worthy of being saved for all public to see and use. Sarasota Comprehensive Plan Environmental Policy 1.3.5 states that the future land use map series set forth by FLU Policy 1.1.2 shall be maintained to show the location of areas of high ecological value and ecological strategy of the future land use map series as identified by staff and approved by the Board of County Commissioners. I have an image of this as well from the Sarasota County GIS and the layers involved. The OUC zone area requested in the zoning swap, which has been highlighted in images.
1 minute, sir.
Includes the, has been assigned a FLU code 6150. It has been determined and presented that this land is of ecological value to the county, states, and its residents. Given the information, we have to reach the conclusion that no part of this property is more important than the other, and that the entire property and parcel is of high ecological value. Finally, the Planning Commission meeting, at the Planning Commission meeting, the swap was asked of Donna Thompson at county staff if this type of zoning exchange or swap had ever occurred in this county. The answer at that time was no. The petitioners may try to point out that there's a gun range upstream that has the equivalent precedent, but I don't think that's correct because the gun range is actually Sarasota County Park and for use to the public. I urge the Board of Commissioners to deny this position for zoning swap. Denying the unanimous recommendation of your Planning Commission and the findings of fact. Denying the legal right for the county governed by the Code of Ordinances.
Thank you, Mr. Martini. Thank you so much. Okay, just for the record, Mr. Glenn Bruno was not on the line, and Antonia Ginsberg-Klemmt was not on the line. I also have an Ari Ginsberg-Klemmt who's up next. And then I have another one that's actually a request to speak card in the chambers here. So right now I have up Ari Ginsberg-Klemmt, can you, that's you? Okay. All right, we will go on then to Steve Alley. Is Mr. Steve Alley on the line? Mr. Steve Alley?
Yes, I am. I'm here.
Great, I can hear you perfectly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're recognized, sir, for 5 minutes. I'll interrupt you with about a minute left to judge your time, okay?
Thank you, commissioners. Good afternoon. My name is Steve Alley. I live at 380 Northeast 5th Avenue, Boca Raton, Florida. While I live on the other side of the state, I care deeply about the state of our coastal environment, and that is the reason that I am calling into your meeting today. I am a Florida coastal master naturalist, a past docent, board member, and coastal hardwood hammock guide at the Gumbo Limbo Nature Center in Boca Raton, educating the public about marine estuaries, including the ecological damage created by a dredged, spoil-filled islands, like the one that's on the property before you. It is often hard for people to see a natural-looking stand of trees with birds sitting on them and realize that in fact it is a man-made, spoil-filled land, an ecological desert full of exotic species that do not benefit the natural food chain. These invaded, spoiled lands left to exotic species are not environmentally beneficial. And there are very strict laws protecting any mangroves on this site, regardless of the property zoning. During my tenure as chairman of the Boca Raton Environmental Advisory Board, we had a very similar scenario to what is before you today. It involved the restoration of a very large spoil-filled island into a marine estuary and park. It was an environmental and community use slam dunk. How could it possibly go wrong? Well, it did. A small group of neighbors did not want their view to change. They mounted a successful grassroots campaign based on a misleading petition that wrongly stated harm to the environment. And of course, the neighboring communities signed up to protest and to protect the environment. Unfortunately, many of our citizens, including City Council, did not clearly see through this ruse. And so now, several years later, we are left with a spoil island, and even past council members have candidly acknowledged and regretted that decision to listen to a loud minority when they had a chance to do the right thing. I feel strongly that your planning commission was swayed by a similar loud minority. Mr. Miller's presentation today was concise, enlightening, logical, and an environmentally correct explanation for doing the right thing. Your staff has advised you that this is the right thing to do. The main message from the objector's petition is to do the right thing for the environment. So please, do the right thing here today. Correct a past zoning error, affirm our individual citizen property rights, and make this zoning swap to protect what really should be protected, environmentally sensitive wetlands, and not a spoil-filled island. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up would be Karen Gabriel Knowlton. Karen Gabriel Knowlton, are you on the line? Ms. Knowlton? Okay, I just got a note from staff that apparently Mr. Glenn Bruno is on the line. Mr. Bruno, are you there? Mr.
I'm
Bruno?
here. How do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. You're recognized.
Okay,
sir.
great.
You're recognized for
Thank
5
you.
minutes.
Sorry.
I'll interrupt you when you have about a minute left, okay? So you can judge your time.
Okay, thank you. This is going to be short and sweet. Good afternoon. My name is Glenn Bruno. I live on Marlin Street in Nokomis. I'd like to thank all the commissioners for their service and your commitment to keep being Sarasota County a great place to live. When I moved here a couple of years ago, I needed to have some work done on my property abutting a canal off Shackett Creek. I was impressed by the rigorous permitting process in place to protect the fragile ecosystem in the area. They took before and after pictures of my mangroves to ensure none of them were destroyed. I've grown to appreciate the value of the Sarasota County Comprehensive Plan. I've done my own research on the applicant's proposed land use change on Laurel and Albee Farm Roads. I'm against the land use change. There's no substantial reason why the property can't be used with existing zoning. We need to protect what is left of our conservation land. This change would adversely impact the sensitive area on Shackett Creek. The area where they propose to build is a perfect example of how conservation land needs to be protected against developers who want to destroy nature and have waterfront property. I find it weirdly convenient that what they say is best for the environment happens to put them on the waterfront. It's also a great concern of mine that this is a non-binding swap. They keep saying they want to build one house, but in reality, they could build 4 or 5 houses there. 4 or 5 houses that'll have no protection from fire and rescue services. The liability to the county taxpayers is huge. This land use change was rightly and unanimously denied in June. Please keep doing the right thing and deny it again. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. I'll check one more time if Miss Karen Gabriel Knowlton's on the line. Okay, we will move on to Wojtek Sawa. Are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
How are you,
Can you hear
sir?
me?
I can hear you fine. You're recognized for 5 minutes, sir. I'll interrupt you at about a minute left so you can judge your time, okay?
Okay, thank you. My name is Wojtek Sava. I am a voting resident and property owner in Sarasota County. I've lived here for 12 years. I am participating in this hearing because I hope and believe that we, as citizens and our representatives, can work together to create positive outcomes for issues that face us. I have acquainted myself with both the written report and the multimedia presentation prepared by environmental expert Jono Miller. And I have also been on site walking the wetlands, wading through the water, and walking the upland. I have rarely seen a report so meticulously prepared and providing such breadth and depth of information as the one prepared by Mr. Miller. The evidence presented is irrefutable, backed by generations of maps, aerial photos, on-site video, and a historical narrative explaining how a combination of circumstances plus a lack of on-site verification led to erroneous zoning determination. The maps Mr. Miller includes in his presentation cover territory, plant growth, presence of water, and historical progression of mapping efforts. The maps clearly demonstrate what intentions were as to the use of the area of by the original developers. The berm, the upland was designed and intended to be a residential area. All the data presented by Mr. Miller is harmonious and non-conflicting. My observations from visiting the site corroborate Mr. Miller's report. Present zoning determination is erroneous. Ecologically valuable native growth wetlands are zoned residential, while an upland berm created for development is zoned as a conservation area. If the current rulings hold, the owners, in order to build a house, will be forced to destroy precious wetlands. While an upland berm created for development will be zoned as a conservation area. If the current rulings hold, the owners, in order to build a house, will be forced to destroy precious wetlands, while an upland populated by invasive foreign species will remain a conservation area. Misinformation has created a paradox. The popular voice of both the proponents and opponents of the zoning change is asking for preservation of the wetland. Nonetheless, misinformation makes those who haven't seen the environmental report and who haven't walked the grounds believe that wet is dry and dry is wet. The sentiment is identical. Let's preserve the wetland. The question is, what is more important, geographical and ecological facts or a misrepresentation of reality? Democracy is a social contract. We, the voters, elect representatives, and our representatives in turn undertake a commitment to act for the public good. One of the most important and precious abilities of democratic government is the ability to correct governmental errors. There is a clear choice between responsive government and bureaucratic government.
I think of children I will talk to, and I think of how I will relate the story of this hearing and the story of government in action. Will it be a story demonstrating that facts are of greater importance, even if abiding by them means reversing a governmental decision? Or will it be a story demonstrating to the children that facts are not important? A story in which I tell the children, you might think you see a forest, but if that forest is not recognized by governmental paperwork, it does not exist. Which story is better for building healthy democracy and promoting community involvement? We are taking part in a wonderful governmental process, a hearing in which officials, experts, and community members have an opportunity to make governance come alive. There is a clear opportunity here for a rare win-win resolution, in which true wetlands are preserved, invasive species are removed, property owners can build a home with a net gain environmental impact, and governmental errors are corrected, the public good is successfully addressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It's my understanding, I think we have one more online remote testimony from Gabrielle Lennon. Are you on the line? Gabrielle, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, I can hear you. I technologically finally figured it out. Thank you.
No worries.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Before you start, as far as the testimony, online remote testimony that I get a list of before the meeting, I have a Karen Gabrielle Knowlton. Is that you?
That's me. Lennon is my last name before I married my husband, yeah. And I
Okay.
go by my middle name, but that's all me, yeah.
Okay, and I've got it twice here. Okay, yes, you're recognized, ma'am. It's for 5 minutes, and I'll interrupt you at about a minute left so you can judge your time, okay?
Okay, thanks. Okay, well, I am speaking today because I have known this family for years, and and I've read all the documents regarding this whole thing, and it's very clear to me that they are requesting not a rezoning because they want a rezoning and stuff, but they're requesting that an expert come in and accurately zone it. They're requesting accuracy. And it seems like, well-meaning people signed the other petition because they didn't want wetlands to be destroyed, which, of course, no one would want wetlands to be destroyed. And this family doesn't want wetlands to be destroyed. In fact, that's why they want it accurately zoned, because they want to build their house on the portion of land that is not wetlands, and they want to build their house on the portion of land that has only invasive plant species, and they want to protect the wetlands and use their ownership of the land to protect these wetlands. So that's why it's very important that they get an accurate person who knows what they're doing to come in and look at the present land distribution and zone it properly. And the quote unquote opposition says, oh, they're looking for favors. They're looking for a rezoning that's a favor, and that's not true. They're asking for accuracy. And the opposition says, oh, it's a dangerous precedent to set because, then other developers can come in and, say, rezone this, rezone that the way I want it rezoned. But that's not at all what this family is asking. They're just asking for accuracy in the zoning. And that is a great precedent to set, because if we have accuracy in our zoning, and if something's been zoned a certain way many, 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 many years ago, and maybe the land changed a bit, or maybe the person was mistaken at the time, but they get someone who really knows what they're doing to come in and zone it accurately, that will protect wetlands, and that will protect the native species of flora and fauna in any area, which is what we all want, or what most of us want anyway. And so that, I think, accuracy is a wonderful precedent to set. And that's what the family is asking for. They there was a petition by the opposition that was also talking about a fire truck not being able to come down the driveway, which is inaccurate, and that the response time would be delayed if, or that the house would be completely inaccessible, which is inaccurate, and that the fire truck couldn't make it over the bridge, which is inaccurate because there's not even going to be a bridge anyway. It's a culvert, and these neighbors that started this petition, they were saying all these things, and then it turned out that, you know, these inaccuracies in their petition were pointed out to the petition's website administrator, and that person actually took down their petition, and the Stop the Swap petition was removed, and it was taken down for violation of the terms of use. So, you know, and it's interesting because the people who signed that petition...
You have a minute left, ma'am.
Thank you. The people who had signed that petition all wanted to protect the wetlands, and that's great because that's what this family wants to do too. And by having it accurately zoned so they can build only where invasive species are and completely protect the areas that need protection, that will be a great thing for all of Sarasota in terms of precedent of accuracy, and also for this family. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Okay, I have no further online remote folks that are requesting to speak. Just to confirm, is there anybody on the line that was registered for an online testimony that was not able to speak? If so, if you could identify yourself. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to testimony of folks that are in the chambers here. We have a number of cards, probably at least a couple hours worth here. So what I'll do is I'll call them up 3 at a time. If you could keep yourself social distance in between speakers, they sanitize the microphone and keyboards for you. And then there's a clock over here to judge your time. So we'll start with the first 3 are Sean Patton, Gary Bookart, and Stephen Gabeloff. I see Mr. Patton coming about. There's nowhere for them to sit, Mike. You can call them up. There's nowhere for them to sit. I'm sorry. If there's room on the side to social distance, fine. If, again, don't feel any pressure to do it. We're just in the interest of time trying to stage people. So yeah, if there's no room, you're welcome to sit right where you're at. Mr. Patton, welcome, sir. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Hello. Thank you for your time, County Commissioners. And is this on?
It's on. Yep.
All right. So thank you for your time. I am not paid for by the property owners. I was invited to view the site by both the property owners and several of my staff and concerned members of the community. I run Stalking Savvy Environmental Consulting, a habitat restoration company, so I am very familiar and intimate with Florida's wetlands. I walked the entirety of the proposed site, including the border of the site, part of the salt marsh, and all the proposed all the upland areas that are proposed for development. I found Jono Miller's report to be very accurate. In fact, I found more invasive species on the upland than specifically stated, including rosary pea, which is a poisonous hazardous invasive species, hurricane grass, carrot woods, Australian pine, Brazilian pepper, and in fact, a lot of these invasive species were encroaching into the black needle rush wetlands. So by actually developing and removing a lot of this vegetation in this upland area will improve the health somewhat of the wetlands by reducing a lot of this invasive species load. I think that we should at least look at rezoning. Whether we use their proposed plan or the county sends someone else out there to do their own rezoning, I think is something that should definitely be considered, because right now as it stands, technically they can build in a very rare protected wetland while not being able to build in an area that is a spoil mound full of invasive species. And so botanically, there is nothing stating that the upland areas that they're proposing to develop should be protected. And in fact, even some of the mangroves on the periphery of those islands are being overshadowed by Brazilian peppers. This is a big problem for a lot of land managers, and I know your county staff love Brazilian peppers, so they can definitely tell you about how bad these trees are. Not only do they grow in freshwater, but they can grow in saltwater and brackish areas. One other fact that I would state is that the roadway leading to it, even though it does go into some lower areas, the invasive species in those lower areas were also still outcompeting a lot of the needle rush and mangroves. So honestly, that whole upland area should be removed. I think that nothing botanically would be lost. And I will secede the rest of my time.
Great, thank you, Sean. Next up is Gary Bookhart, followed by Steve Gabella, followed by Laurel Bookhart. Welcome, sir. You're recognized, and again, there's a clock there to judge your time.
All righty. Thank you, Commissioners. My name's Gary Bookhart, and I'm opposed to this rezone request. When the owners bought the two properties on the online tax sale for less than $22,000, on there also each respondent who auctions or tries to purchase the land, there's a disclaimer here, and I'm going to read it. It says, "Buyer beware. It is the bidder's responsibility to perform due diligence, research, and to fully understand the process, timeframes, limitations, and risks involved when purchasing real property of auction." So I'm going to move on. We're talking about the south parcel today, but this also pertains to the other north parcel. We're talking about today that goes, talking about uplands, marine park, tidal marsh, wetlands, and play an important part of the Shaka Creek Marine Park, not just wetlands. OUC serves nature, water cleansing, and public access for boating, paddle boards, and kayak, and retains the open character of the land. OUC zones were set aside, our governing officials for this, and should not be touched, and hadn't been touched for over 50 years. If changed to RSF1 to build on the island, the owners gets right access through the OUC 700-foot strip of uplands by disturbing and filling of wetlands for a driveway and construction of culvert bridge, destroying the oyster reef, which is currently in the middle of the South Marine Park opening, restricting water flow and restricting access through Marine Park for public use, and changing manatee access into the Marine Park. This action would also open up to other owners and developers. Buyer beware. Their proposed wetland and surface impacts are roughly 4,300 square feet. I'm mainly talking about from the culvert to the exit of their driveway from Albee Farm, and 621 square feet of surface water impacts. So they are impacting wetlands. Planning Commissioner's findings of facts. The proposed change would not be consistent with the intent, goals, objectives, policies, guiding principles, programs of the comprehensive plan. I'm going to read a couple of comprehensive plans and unified development codes. One is Environmental Policy 2.1.4, water-related and water-dependent development shall not adversely impact the manatee. This is reference the waterway access use, Environmental Policy 4.3.4. The county will discourage any conversion of water-dependent uses to non-water-dependent uses and shall prohibit conversion when land uses reduce or eliminate public accessibility on recreational on waterways. Marine park definition from the Unified Code. Marine park purpose and intent. The Marine District is intended to protect and preserve water areas within jurisdiction of, regardless of designation of future land use map. All waters including but not limited to all boat basins, canals, and waterways, and all publicly and privately owned submerged lands extended from mean high water line. There was a transcript out of the December neighborhood community watch workshop, and they were basically talking about the design of their culvert passage and not a bridge. And they were talking about the height would not be an issue. They also said that this is a private property, which I agree, it is private property, and we have every right to restrict access to our property. Marine Park is a land use planning designation and does not refer to an actual park or to public use. Oyster beds. I talked about the oyster bed. It's a huge oyster bed, right where they're having planning to.
Thank you, sir.
So much.
Thank you. Next up is Steve Gabeloff, followed by Laurel Bookhart, followed by Travis Dudley.
I have some material to be distributed to the.
Go ahead, give it to Commissioner Hines.
I'm running already. Okay. On.
Sir, if you could come over to the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
The Planning Board Commissioners had some questions about the driveway. At first, they thought it was going to be 20 feet wide, but the testimony from the applicant was that it's just a 10-foot wide dirt path, covered with some crushed concrete. But if you look at Appendix 2, the first tab, and Drawing A, you will see that the driveway is actually consists of a base 6-inch thick compacted subgrade, which is wider than 10 feet, and then you have 6 inches of crushed concrete with 2-foot wings on each side. So you actually have a width of about 14 feet. And if you turn to the next drawing, you will see the...
Sir, if you'd like, you can lay it down on the wolf right there.
Great,
and then
thanks.
it'll
appreciate that.
project for you.
Yeah.
The wolf, please.
And that if you look at the next drawing, B, also from the DEP packet and presented to the commissioners at the last meeting, you will see there's an 8-foot drop down from the sidewalk on Albee Farm Road to the right-of-way of the dirt pathway, and that has a 7.3 degree slope to it. And if you look at the little red arrow there, you'll see that's going to be a 10-foot wide concrete driveway, which encompasses more than 150 feet. And they do show some water collection device in there, but it looks like that device will just be collecting water off of Albee Farm Road and will not account for the runoff from that concrete driveway down to the crushed concrete dirt road. If you go on to Appendix 2, Drawing C, you'll see the DEP provided drawing of the bridge crossing of the opening to the inlet there, and you'll see a 4-foot concrete pipe covered by an 8-inch grating to keep manatees out, which have been known to give birth in that area. Now, if you look at the top of the bridge structure, you have about a 90-foot long bridge that tapers down on both sides, and again, if you look at the arrow, that bridge is covered with a 10-foot wide concrete roadway that will drain either way down the slope. If you turn the page again to Drawing D, you'll see that bridge structure is actually 16 feet wide, and the following Drawing E confirms that it is a 90-foot long structure. So this is far from a 10-foot wide dirt road. It has at least 250 feet of concrete pavement on it. And if you go on to Appendix 3, Document A, I have an excerpt from a U.S. DEP document entitled Estimating and Projecting Impervious Cover in the Southeast United States. And that document explains that impervious cover is not one unambiguous item. They say that, of course, roofs are unambiguously impervious cover. Paved roads are unambiguously impervious cover. But compacted dirt roads, parking areas, and items like that are considered functionally impervious, even though they're not paved. And another problem that they point out is that not only must you consider the total area or percentage of a parcel's impervious cover, you must consider how that impervious cover is distributed in the parcel. And they say that it. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Next up is Laurel Bookhart, followed by Travis Dudley, followed by Philip Browse.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
My name's Laurel Bookhart, and I respectfully add my voice to the unanimous voice of your Planning Commission, who recommended you deny the Ginsberg-Klemmt rezoning petition. As you know, the Ginsberg-Klemmts are not unaccustomed to purchasing fragile properties and then trying to change the rules. On December 9th, 2015, Vice Chair Mayo made the motion to deny the Ginsberg-Klemmts' appeal on pretty much submerged property that they own on Siesta Key Circle. As then Commissioner Christine Robinson said, I believe they understood what kind of property they were getting into when they stepped into this, and therefore they would have understood the rules that were in place. Then Chair Carolyn Mason called for a vote, which was unanimous in denying the Ginsberg-Klemmt appeal. This is another case where the Ginsberg-Klemmts have purchased cheap property and are trying to change the rules. In 2015, the Ginsberg-Klemmts purchased 2 parcels, one of which was in question today, for under $22,000 by tax deed sale. They knew what they bought, and they should have understood the zoning that was in place. The SarasotaClerk.com tax deed auctions page clearly states buyers beware. It is the bidder's responsibility to perform due diligence research and to fully understand the process, timeframes, limitations, and risks involved when purchasing real property at auction. Did the Ginsberg-Klemmts not inspect the property prior to their purchase in 2015? If it is so obvious that the majority of the RSF1 portion of this parcel is wetlands, why did they or their inspector not notice this? Is the county liable to change zoning for individuals who do not carefully inspect tax sale property before purchasing? If an inspector was hired to be sure the land was buildable, shouldn't the Ginsberg-Klemmts have a grievance with their inspector and not with Sarasota County? If the Ginsberg-Klemmts decide not to build on the residentially zoned portion of their property, they have a right to make that decision. If they'd like to build elsewhere, they have the right to purchase legitimately zoned property on or off the water to do so. They're 2 separate decisions. There's no connection or basis for a zoning swap here. As Commissioner Cooper said in closing statements at the 2019 Planning Commission hearing, the only thing that is equal about this OUC and RSF lands proposed to be swapped is their relative size. This is a blatant attempt to rezone waterfront OUC conservation land purchased 5 years ago for a pittance and transform it into developable residential property potentially worth more than $500,000, and if they or a developer that they sell the land to later find a way to rezone more of the conservation property, millions of dollars. This and other waterfront conservation land was wisely put aside by the county to compensate for early residential waterfront developments, where developers could fully build out the property with no requirements to set aside a portion for conservation to help mitigate the water and provide habitat for fish and wildlife. OUC property is intended to retain the open character of the land. It is to be used to establish wildlife and open space corridors as buffer areas to lands designated public resource lands on the future land use map, to protect life and property in areas subject to flooding. And yes, this conservation land does ask it as an important buffer against flooding of the nearby waterfront homes, and to conserve fish and wildlife. It is significant that this OUC land is on the water. The RSF1 land is not. The findings of fact from the June 6, 2019 Planning Commission hearing have many standalone reasons that this swap should be denied, including the property change would not be consistent with the intent, goals, objectives, policies, guiding principles, and programs of the comprehensive plan. Yes, this petition is in direct violation of your comprehensive plan. Findings of the fact number 8 reads, it is not impossible to find other adequate sites in the county for the proposed use in districts already permitting such use. If the Ginsberg-Klemmts would like to build on a waterfront lot, there's one for sale only a few blocks away. It's a 0.39 acre parcel on Ravenna Street in Nokomis, a waterfront lot also on the Shackett Creek, listed for $299,000. It's ready with city water and electric hookup. And there's no need to destroy additional OUC property to construct a 600-foot driveway. Plus, there's a nearby fire hydrant and no need to waive timely service from the fire department due to insufficient access. Why don't the Ginsberg-Klemmts choose to purchase this legitimately zoned property for fair market price and build there?
Thank you. Ma'am. Next up, Travis Dudley, followed by Philip Browse, followed by Ken Tribbett.
First thing I have here is a copy of the petition that was signed by 240 individuals to support the wetland. And also just supporting what Mr. Miller had to say about the actual designation of the wetland. That designation was made aerially, specifically without doing any actual inspection of the species that were on that area. I've received a lot of reports about neighbors complaining about mangroves being trimmed in the area, which is perfectly reasonable. I would do the same thing if I saw that, but I'd also be very careful that they were actually mangroves. There's several other species there. If you look in the pictures, the other species there are Spanish peppers, there's other invasive species. These invasive species that have been planted there, they're not protected by anything other than people thinking that they look real nice. They're weeds. I mean, they're not that protected. This other area up in, oh, this can go up here? I don't really know how this works. All right. So this whole area over here, where they're trying to build here, this is invasive species. There's mangroves up here, this whole area here. This salt marsh here, that's much more protected. I mean, there's several different species, oysters and other things that can live in there, but all these invasive things, we see these in all sorts of different areas in Florida where you have all sorts of different stuff going around. People call it protected. There's great guidelines in place on how to actually protect the mangroves, how to actually protect these areas, and what should be protected. We got really, really sensitive about what we're calling protected wetlands here. And, you know, I understand that very much. We definitely want to protect that. But Mr. Miller did say in his paper, which is excellent writing, thank you, sir, that, you know, we need to actually have a much closer inspection of what needs to be protected there, because there's a lot of things there that aren't really that interesting, to be perfectly honest. And that's pretty much all I have to say, other than please take a look at all those names that are on there. They're all about protecting the actual wetlands, which can be seen in this area here. This is probably the safest area to build, because there's literally a bunch of junk there.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Philip Browse, followed by Ken Tribbett, followed by Michelle Martini.
Good afternoon. I want to start out by saying that because of the anxiety that I get, I typically try to avoid any contentious projects. But I took this one because of the fact that my experience and background as a land manager for counties and for the state, and in doing restoration and management, told me that this property was an important wetland that was in serious decline, and that it will disappear soon. that being a relative term, but it is in serious trouble, and that the only way to assure that protection that it needs is through a mitigation process. As much as many of us don't like to see development, that is quite often the process that gets protection underway. The impacts that will occur if the landowners are able to go forward and get the building permit and build their home will be mitigated completely per all of the environmental laws, local, state, and federal. And those impacts will be minor compared to the gain that is made from the mitigation that will follow, and in restoring and preserving and managing this wetland. As has already been pointed out, it has many, many invasive exotic species. This is affecting not just the species diversity of our native vegetation, but it's affecting water quality, how the land is responding to sedimentation and buildup. The wetland is a key wetland, in my opinion, to the area. And if it sits as is, it's going to continue to decline. In my mind, there's no question on that. Since it's private property, no one can make any landowner go in there and remove the invasive species, or plant more mangroves, or clean out areas that need to be managed. This process does do that, though. And I think it's in the best interest of the local environment and ecology to go ahead and allow that process to move forward. That's all I have. Thank you.
No, thank you. I don't know why you're worried. It was great testimony. Okay, next up is Ken Tribbett, followed by Michelle Martini, followed by Heidi. I think it's OCHLBUY, maybe?
Hi, I'm Ken Tribbett. I'm opposed to this. I'm a property owner across the creek, and there's been talk about what plants are currently there, and I kind of want to talk about some of the animals that are currently there. We have 2 mated pairs of bald eagles that live in the area, and they actively hunt and perch off of the oaks that are existing and the mangroves that are existing right on the point where they're talking about developing. There are ospreys there. There are little blue herons, which are endangered. All of these animals live here. There's a ton of tide birds that walk through here, roseate spoonbills. There is a ton of fish that swim through this area. And some of my concerns would be, yes, I agree 100%. We should say the wetlands. You should not be building. I don't know how anybody can build on this portion of land at all. Those wetlands are very sensitive. What I would say is some questions which I think are going to be presented here in the future is what's going to happen with the drainage system on this property? Is there going to be some type of storm pond there? How do you go and fix that in the future if there's silt buildup in that? What about the sewage system? Who is going to be responsible for the sewage pipe when it inevitably fails? Are they going to be responsible for putting a down payment that shows that they can pay for that repair? So this is a 600-foot long driveway that's going to carry sewage out when that repairs? Or is the county responsible for that? What about if there is a fire? And forget the fact that a fire truck could cross over that culvert. If they're laying down fire suppressant on a fire, where's that fire suppressant going to go? It's going to dump directly into the wetlands and directly into the creek. How is that going to be captured? I think these are things that need to be thought about. I'm sure some of this is going to be in the presentation, but I don't see how they could possibly capture all of that on this environmentally sensitive land. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Michelle Martini, followed by Heidi. Oh boy, I can't read it. I'm so sorry. OCHLBUY, and Martin Dahlborg.
Afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you. I'd first like to point out a few things that occurred at the Planning Commissioners meeting. The first one is the sensitivity of this swap. Never in the history of Sarasota County has a swap from OUC to RSF1 occurred. That was attested to by Donna Thompson, the staff employee. If this petition of this nature is approved, this committee would be setting an unprecedented motion and exposing the county to future loss of sensitive waterfront land to greedy developers. Number two, the delayed in response to public safety. A delay in service response time was affirmed by Mr. Tom Hicks, a Sarasota County public safety representative who spoke at the review hearing. He also affirmed that this delayed response would be attached to the property in perpetuity. Number three, the non-binding concept plan. Throughout this entire process, the petitioners have stated their intent to build their single-family home on the swapped land and raise their family. However, their non-binding permit suggests otherwise. When asked directly by Commissioner Morris if the petitioners would be willing to make a stipulation and change to a binding permit, an agent for them said, quote, "I don't think they're willing to make such a stipulation." Number four, the petitioners can build on the property in its current zoning. During the review hearing, much concern was given to the fact that the subject property already has 2 RSF1 zoning. The petitioners own 2 parcels, each containing an RSF zoning, and that was affirmed by a county staff employee that said the petitioners can build within its current zoning, period. Additional disturbance to OUC land. Notwithstanding the land within the swap, if approved, nearly an additional 1 acre of OUC land would be disturbed. This would be disturbed for the access to the property by way of a bridge, a driveway, and also utilities. Within that additional disturbance, 4,500 of wetlands will be destroyed. And it is on their survey as 4,500 wetlands and 600 or 586 surface area will be impacted by a bridge and driveway. That does not constitute an equal swap in terms of surface area and sensitivity of land. In future support of the denial of this petition, I would like to point out the Blue Ways Paddling Guide published by Sarasota's own Recreation and Natural Resources. This guide is designed to bring awareness to Sarasota County's natural beauty and the unique blend of mangrove forests and wildlife estuaries, while paddling along the bays, lagoons, and creeks of the beautiful county. The Donna Bay Roberts Bay Trail takes kayakers directly past the subject property by way of the Shackett Creek route. This guide points out the exploration of blacktip needle rush marshes, just as Mr. Miller has pointed out, to the north and south side of Laurel Road. The subject property is directly on the south side of Laurel Road. That is what you are referring to in your publication. It is the petitioner's right to ask, but it is your obligation to be governed by the ordinances, guidelines, policies, and procedures and programs already in place when considering this petition. I urge you to consider the unanimous recommendation from the planners and deny the petition for an exchange of OUC or any other environmentally sensitive land for RSF1 based upon their findings of the facts. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Next up, Heidi, then Martin Dahlborg, followed by Bogdan Wildowski, and after that, we'll take a 10-minute break. Sorry about your last name, I couldn't read it.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Heidi with the bad handwriting, Heidi Dahlborg. So hello, I'm Heidi Dahlborg. I grew up in Sarasota. I currently live in Nokomis. I'm an environmentalist, amateur naturalist. I've worked in outdoor nature education in our community. I taught at Outward Bound when they had a manatee branch on the Peace River, and was involved in starting a forest preschool that met at Sarasota County Parks. When I lived in the city, I briefly had a seat on the Sarasota City Parks and Rec Board. I live nearby the plot of land in consideration. I like to fish and ride bikes in that area with my kids. So like the others, I'm in favor of preserving the wetlands. To do this, I want to speak in support of rezoning this land and granting the permits to build the single-family home. This is a pretty simple matter that's gotten needlessly complex. The wetlands have been classified as buildable, and the high ground is being considered wetlands. This petition is to correct that zoning error. Anyone who would like to preserve the wetlands should support this rezone and petition. The people who are in opposition to this rezoning are the neighbors across the canal from the property. They're motivated by self-interest to preserve their view, because if the zoning is reversed, the home will be in their line of sight. The land the Ginsberg-Klemmts are seeking to rezone has two parts: the wetland, which they could currently build on, and the error is that they could build on that most environmentally sensitive part of the tract. And then there's the high ground that's riddled with invasive species that currently is designated to be preserved. The petition is to reverse that. The landmass that is mistakenly classified as wetlands is a berm overgrown with invasive species. My high school friends got their Eagle Scout badges for spending hours tearing down the plants that grow on that berm. You can spend a lot of time trying to get those Brazilian peppers out. So there is precedent in rezoning the land this way. It was done to create the Knights Trail gun range. So I'm speaking as a Sarasota local, an environmental naturalist, and also a friend of the Ginsberg-Klemmts. It's amusing to hear this being presented as an issue of stopping big developers in the wetlands at a time when the east end of that road there's right next to the river, there are huge developments going there. Anyone who has a real interest in stopping development of environmentally sensitive land, there's the entire expansion of Laurel Road would lead to a much greater piece of property. I'm old enough and have been in this community long enough to recognize that Jono Miller is like a local environmentalist rock star. If they have him coming up and talking about this piece of property, there is a very special and sensitive area that they actually have the opportunity to protect. So my little blue-haired friend over there, the Ginsberg-Klemmts, they are people who are more eco-conscious than most, and they live with a very small footprint. I have known the Ginsberg-Klemmts since they arrived in Sarasota. They sailed into town after traveling the world on their sailboat with two small kids when they were expecting their third. I was hired as the midwife to help them have their third child, which was very memorable because it was born in the marina. They were never able to leave their boat. The baby was born there, and I can remember walking in, and this girl who was sitting over here was in her mother's arms. So they're truly a special type. They're the adventurous type of people who would live in a boat with three small kids. And after seeing the world, they chose to make this place their home. They've raised their three kids here, two of which are students at New College, and that baby from the boat is now a student at Pineview, which is my old school as well. And the home that they currently live in is like all solar and covered in native plants. These people are not big developers. They're going to take excellent care of the property. And the reason that Jono Miller has jumped in on this, and the reason is because they're going to do the right thing by this piece of property. It's going to be, we are lucky as a community that people like this have purchased it. So I was pleased to learn that they were the owners of this tract because, like I said, this is land that I enjoy. It's in my neighborhood. And if there were anybody who was less environmentally conscious, they'd just apply for the permit. They'd build on the wetland that they're allowed to build on. And but these people are taking the time to make this change to do it right. And so please grant them the rezoning and the permit that they need to proceed with their project. So, thank you for your time. And
Thank you. Next up, Martin Dahlberg, followed by Bogdan Wildowski, and then we'll take a 10-minute break or so, and then we'll continue on with public comment. Welcome, sir.
Hi, thank you for your time. My name is Martin Dahlberg. I live in Nokomis. Heidi is my wife. And I'm a friend of the family, and I'm in support of the Rezone Petition 1904. We all agree that it's good and important that the wetland portion of this undeveloped piece of property gets to stay wetland. The Ginsberg-Klemmts are good people, they're not developers, and they're more environmentally active and conscious than most. As one example, they have taken upon themselves to put solar panels on their current home. It's important to point out, I think, we're talking about an undeveloped piece of property, not a preserve. There was talk about the marine park, which is the river part of the property. The kayaks, there's an access on the other side, and the manatees, where the culvert is going to be built, it's not deep enough for manatees on that side. The manatees come in on the other side. I've walked the property and taken a look at it. So I just wanted to put some rebuttal on the kayaks and the manatees. They acquired a piece of land. They want to build their home on it. They discovered that it was more environmentally correct to make the proposed zoning change. So I support the proposed change, that they build the land on the property that is the part of the property that is elevated and not in the wetlands. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Bogdan Woldowski. Welcome, sir.
I'll be brief, with my accent and everything. I'm not affiliated to anybody here. I mean, I know Erica from previous meeting. I'm in support of their petition. I own a couple of properties in Nokomis, and I've owned the property on the water. I know how it's easier to maintain and you get access to the property. It's estuaries and wetlands are very nice, but lots of debris come in and you have to clean it, plastics and stuff. So it's way easier if you got access to it and somebody there to do it. Plus invasive species are easier to maintain when someone is there on the property. That's my points, that's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you, sir. All right, we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll continue with some public comment.
I just don't want to
Mic check, check. How do you hear me, Sammy? Check, mic check. Mic check, mic check. Check.
Mic check. Mic check, 1, 2, 3. Mic check. Mic check.
Mic check, mic check. Mic check.
Mic check. 1, 2, 3. Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. Testing 1, 2. Mic check. Testing 1, 2. Mic check. That. Mic check. 1, 2, 3. Mic check. 1, 2, 3.
I can hear it back there. It's quiet. I hear much better than I can hear it from here. Now these are all lower in the map mix. In the front speaker mix, because if it's back in there. Mic check, mic check.
That's big.
Mic check. 1, 2, 3. Mic check. Mic check. Mic check. 1, 2, 3. Mic check. Mic check.
All right, we are back. If we could come to order, please. All right, let's continue with some public comment here, starting with Michael Averbach. My apologies on the last name. Followed by Mava Ginsberg-Klemmt. I do not have that marked as an applicant, 'cause I'm going to assume that's public comment. And Richard Norton. Good afternoon, sir. You're recognized for 5 minutes, and there's a clock right there to judge your time.
Good afternoon. Thank you for listening to me. I'm here to support the rezone petition and the attendant work permit submitted by the applicants. I'm going to approach this in a slightly different way because my professional background includes things like taxation and land use and property assessment. First of all, I'd like to say I'm proud to have known Eric and him for close to 10 years. They're wonderful people. They're wonderful. They raised and are raising 3 wonderful kids. And what they're doing today is so counterintuitive to most property developers that I just can't believe that they're actually doing it. I've developed deep respect over the years for their drive, for their motivation, for their dedication to do what is right, as opposed to do what is the most expedient thing at the moment. As I was looking at this project, one of the first things I did is I looked at the property appraiser site. And I looked at the parcel in question. I looked at the parcel just north of it. They are, according to the property appraiser, they're assessed at a combined value of $130,000. Now, what confers value upon this property? Why isn't it, you see many lakes that are assessed at 0. Why? Because there is no way to use that lake. Now, it's that mixed zoning. It's the fact that there is an RSF zoning within it, which gives the owners of the property a right to build a home or homes. Now, as to the matter of taxation of this property, of course, that generates a tax bill, that $130,000. Eric and him, as well as every predecessor in title, have paid taxes on this property for as long as it's maintained value, which was years, maybe decades. And now they're approaching the county and asking the county to honor their property rights. That's the way, that's just my perspective, my personal perspective on it. Now, there's another way to look at it.
Come closer to the mic, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's another way to look at it. If a zoning change is denied, Eric and him being who they are, I don't think they would build on wetlands, I'll be honest with you. But they will likely have a successor in interest, a successor in title. And that successor, I suspect, would try to build on the wetlands. In addition, there would be, I think there would be a big question as to the density that a successor like that would push for. My understanding is that split-zoned lots, such as the one we have in this case, can use the OUC balance of acreage to increase residential density. It might be possible for a subsequent owner to obtain a density consistent with multifamily zoning. I just did a rough calculation. I don't confer any validity upon it, but I came up with 48 dwellings on less than 1 acre of residentially zoned land. And also in this instance, not only will the wetlands presently zoned RSF be impacted by the fill, but some of the OUC zoned land may be impacted by auxiliary structures, such as parking lot and fill for a parking lot, which I believe they're allowed in the OUC zoning. To me, what the Ginsberg-Klemmt are proposing is the most conscientious resolution to the situation created by an error. Nobody's to blame. It's just what happened. The solution they're proposing preserves the wetlands, and I believe I heard they're willing to stipulate to lock in density to 1 residential unit. Frankly, I don't really understand the neighborhood opposition to the zoning swap. Usually, you know, you've got a developer who wants to increase density, and of course the neighbors are saying, well, you know, we don't want this dense subdivision next to us. It's going to increase traffic counts. It's going to increase other stress on infrastructure. Here, what they're proposing is the opposite. They're proposing to decrease density. They're proposing to solve a problem. It looks to me like if this problem is not solved by them, it's going to be solved. It's going to remain a problem. It's not going to go away. I think we're all lucky that that it's them, and it's their commitment to preserving the environment that drives this petition. So I urge the board to grant applicants the rezone petition. I believe it is an equitable decision in this case, and it's equitable to the environment, it's equitable to the property owners, and it's equitable to other people residing in the neighborhood. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Mava Ginsberg-Klemmt, followed by Richard Norton. And after that, it'll be Mia McKeon.
Hello. My name is Maiva Ginsberg-Klemmt. I am a freshman at Pineview School. Fun fact about me, I was born on the water on our sailboat Pangea in slip P7 of Longboat Key moorings. On the paper that you have in front of you is about my parents' life story of how they met in southern France and sailed the ocean blue for over 10 years. For 5 days a week, I row for Sarasota crew. I care about the water as much as anybody else who's speaking here this afternoon. My parents put together a website to explain to the community about their story. My mom created a website called srqus.com, made specifically to inform you in every aspect that you would need to know on this case. On that website, there are videos, documents, and audio recordings. On one of the videos on the website has someone at a meeting saying he would prefer my parents to build in the wetlands, the current RSF1, than to build in the uplands, which is the OUC, out where they could see the house. Wetlands are a highly productive and biologically diverse system that enhance water quality, control erosion, maintain stream flows, and provide a home to at least 1/3 of all threatened and endangered species. Wetlands are important because they serve as a wildlife nursery, flood control.
Oh, honey, don't worry. We get a kick out of you knowing RSF1 versus OUC. Believe me, you're fine.
Through the research I've done, where my parents want to build a house has already been severely impacted by dredge and fill development since 1943. This means that where my parents want to build has already been touched and developed by mankind. Their reasoning for rezoning is to save the wetlands and not destroy them. The neighbors saying, save the wetlands, without even understanding my parents' intention of actually saving the wetlands is complete ignorance. I have seen my parents laughed at and misunderstood by the neighbors going against this rezone. They don't even understand that the current zoning of RSF1 is wetlands. They don't understand that there are areas zoned as open use conservation where my parents can't legally build. That isn't wetlands. They are uplands. This means that they are more elevated due to the impacts of past development. They don't understand that this rezoning will help save the wetlands and not hurt them. Please support this rezoning petition to save the wetlands and allow to build our home. Thank you.
Thank you. You did great. Richard Norton, followed by Mia McKeon, followed by Rami Roberts.
have to bend the microphone down. There you go. Can everyone hear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm Richard Norton. I live right across the creek from the proposed new area. We built our dream house there 11 years ago. Beautiful view. I'm not too sympathetic with the $22,000 the owners have invested. I paid $250,000 for 60 foot of shoreline to build across the creek, and so did everyone else there. The mangroves along the proposed roadway that are on the plot there, and the lots to be developed, we can't even trim our own mangroves. In fact, one resident destroyed a couple mangroves, and it cost him $10,000 in fines. So right now, the shoreline is beautiful. The kayaks love it, the mangroves love it, the manatees play there, and the birds nest there. A single-family home, just to be along the water, to build a long access road and destroy another couple hundred feet of mangroves, build a road, build a bridge, and everything to get access to the water. Only one house is shown there on the plot, but there's another plot that shows 2 more lots already staked out. I know it's 90 degrees outside, but I think this is a big snow job. This man is a developer. It's what he does, and he's not going to sit there and look at these 2 empty lots and not build 2 more homes or sell those lots for development. All this talk about invasive species, I think developers from Sarasota are the invasive species here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Mia McKeon, followed by Rami Roberts, followed by John Dent.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
My name is Mia McKeon, and I have been a real estate agent in Sarasota for 9 years. I've known Erica and Ahim personally and professionally for almost 10 years. I strongly support their zoning petition and the accompanying major work permit. As a realtor, I'm an advocate for property rights regardless of the manner in which the property was acquired. Conditions on the ground change over the years, and the zoning may no longer reflect the highest and best use of the specific parcel, especially after all the development around the parcel has affected the property. I know how hard they've worked on the project for over 5 years. I've seen them spend entire days trying to remove Brazilian pepper by hand from their property. They've spent sweat equity and have hired environmental consultants, engineers, surveyors, and an attorney. They really want this. It seems that people are upset because they are proposing the best environmental solution while keeping the right of the residential designation on their property. I don't believe it's rule-breaking to own and defend the property and building rights that go along with their land. I personally would love to see Erica and Ahim help the county to create an excellent solution to the zoning dilemma. I believe that the fact that Jono Miller is representing them on a volunteer basis speaks volumes on just how valid this zoning correction is. I respectfully ask that you look in detail at the comprehensive plan and to look at the actual state of the property. I believe that you will see the zoning correction is the right thing to do. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up, Rami Roberts, followed by Mr. John Dent. While the next speaker is making their way up here, I do have a card for Jonathan Cole, but it's clicked as an applicant versus a citizen, so I'll assume it's a citizen here, but clear that up before the time comes. That'd be great.
All
Welcome.
Right. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name's Romy Roberts, and I live in Nokomis. I'm fully in support of the Ginsberg-Klemmt zoning corrections. I believe the opposition is against the project out of self-interest rather than concern for the wetland itself. I hope that you Commissioners can see past the facade If they really cared about both property rights and the wetlands, they would all be in favor of this zoning change. Why are property owners in Sarasota allowed to request zoning changes? I didn't know much about it until my friend Antonia's parents told me about their property. I live just down the street from this property. It seems most people ask for zoning changes so that they can build more density on their property. People use their property to maximum benefit. The Ginsberg-Klemmts, however, are simply requesting a zoning change because of an error on zoning in the first place. The opposition claims that they are concerned for the environments. After listening to the comments at the neighborhood meeting, I noticed that this isn't the case. They said that they would prefer the Ginsberg-Klemmts build on wetlands rather than the uplands where they would have a view of a residential home. Why is it okay to take the use of residentially zoned land from the Ginsberg-Klemmts and make it conservation, but not okay to take conservation zone land and make it residential? They seem to think that a single home nestled behind a grove on a spoiled area is somehow going to ruin their idea of wilderness. You know what would decimate the nature of the area? A house in one of the last wetlands in Shackett Creek, or even worse, a multifamily condo built on the wetlands to maximize density of the residential portion. What's further, those opposing the rezone say it triggers a precedent for other rezones in the county. If there were other split RSF or OUC parcels in Sarasota where a residential portion is 100% wetlands and the conservation has upland portions, I would welcome the precedent, wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to keep incorrect zoning that goes against your own comprehensive plan? As Planning Commissioner Mass put, she has never seen a swap like this. Sometimes the commission must take situations case by case, and this is one of those. Not every case attracts the interest of Mr. Miller, an avid sustainable growth environmental activist with deep knowledge of the county and needs of preserving its environmental assets. Unique cases like this require unique solutions, and the Ginsberg-Klemmts have devised a solution that everyone can win with. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is John Dent.
Good afternoon. I made the mistake. My legal assistant, Shelley Martini, came and asked for the day off. The mistake was I asked her why. So I'm here to help out. As many of you may know, I've had extensive experience in development orders, wetlands, wetland mitigation, permitting. Many of you are aware that I did all the legal work for the Pompa Ranch, and we faced environmental, what they called wetlands, I thought were just little pools. My standpoint on this, as I understand it, they're proposing what somebody's labeled a mitigation of property that is zoned apparently for development, zoning, but consists of wetlands and mangrove areas. I looked at the mangrove area and it's a 0.07 elevation. Now, everybody that has any knowledge in here knows that that property, no matter what it's zoned, will never be disturbed or developed for anything. There's no point to mitigate it. They have no rights because it's zoned something, because I can tell you, right now, I'm in the process. I live on the water. We have a dock. We wanted to change our dock and redo it. So we started the process 2 years ago. I finally got DEP approval. Now, I live on Sarasota Bay, Golden Gate Point, okay? We have a dock. We finally got DEP to pass grace on it, but then the Corps said, oh, you got to do another grass survey, because the grasses that grow, which are all around this property, are extremely sensitive. If you cover them, they die. If you get chemicals that wash in the water, they die. Not considering all the other stuff. So this is not a mitigation. We're not mitigating anything because you could never develop that other parcel for anything. I can assure you, my considered legal opinion, I've tried. I tried to, in some of these little wetlands or wetlands on the ranch, we tried to get them to mitigate, okay? There were not anywhere close to the environmental lands which are wetlands and mangroves. They'll never be disturbed. So that accomplishes nothing. So you need to view this as a rezoning of this piece of property, which again is unsensitive. My understanding, and I got called in this late, that there's grass flats, grass on the ground. Now, you build impervious surfaces like a driveway, a house, and all of that, and put motor vehicles on it, eventually they're going to leak or drop oils, other things. Through rains, they're going to seep down into the water, and they're going to destroy those grasslands, which are very sensitive, which we know they functioned for minnows and development, for hatching, all these things. So what you're not talking about, I think people have been led to believe, I think a misnomer, that, well, you compare this wetland to this one, and it's a lot better because we're going to mitigate. Tell them to go ask for a permit to build anything in that property. I can guarantee you they'll never get close to the Corps of Engineers or the Department of Environmental Protection. Alone, I don't know that they'd pass anything to pull a permit in Sarasota County to develop that parcel they say they're mitigating for. Never happened. So what you're looking at is isolated. Is this property appropriate for a rezoning for development? And I would suggest to you it doesn't meet any of the criteria. To bootstrap into it, they've tried to make this threat, oh, we've got this property, we need to mitigate it. I think that's patently wrong. And I think to try to rely upon that and justify you all zoning on it is totally wrong and not justifiable. Be glad to answer any questions. I've been through this. I've been through permitting. You don't get through all the agencies permitting a process like this for that wetland they want to say they're going to preserve with zoning on it. Not going to happen. They'll never get a permit on anything in that. In my considered legal opinion, I've tried for a lot less. As I say, on Palmer Ranch, we had some wetlands that were a lot less serious than that, and we couldn't touch them. Everything we tried. Any questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Dent. Okay. The last card here is Jonathan Cole, but it's clicked as the applicant. Have we had any clear? Thank you, sir. Okay. Then any online and remote testimony has been addressed by this board. Any written communication has been presented to the board members and made part of the record. We addressed all the cards that I have before me that were presented by the clerk. Is there anyone in this chamber that would like to speak that did not fill out a request to speak card? Okay, seeing none, we will end the public comment. With that, the applicant has 5 minutes of rebuttal. Welcome back, Mr. Miller. You're recognized for 5 minutes. You know where the clock is there.
Yes, so thank you. First, I want to say nobody representing the owners have mentioned the word mitigation, so I have no idea where that's coming from, and I don't believe there are any grass flats in this area. So let me point out, back to your point, they're not changing the zoning. They're still going to be OUC, Marine Park, and RSF1. They're just trying to put it in the correct location. The reason this has never been done before is you've never had a situation where you messed up both the OUC and the RSF on the same parcel. So the only precedent that's being set here is a precedent for the county to be willing to admit it's made a mistake. Now let's go through, if we can have the wolf, and Commissioner Hines, this is starting out for you. You can see, and I'll pass this around, you can see the white area, which was a salt flat that was recorded in 1948, and you can see that the soil survey showed that this was tidal marsh, and yet the county identified it as RSF1. Here's the half-section map from 1966 that shows all this area as being mangrove, even though we know that in 1957 it was spoil berm, so the county got it wrong there. We should not be talking about driveway impacts at this time because this is just whether this is correctly zoned and that's correctly zoned. But let me just quickly say, and this will be get to in the second permit, the owners have a right to construct a driveway. They've chosen the narrowest possible design to save upland trees and minimize wetland impacts. They're going to be removing a lot of exotics, planting 60 mangroves, and they already have their core permit and their DEP permit for this property. They're going to be impacting 1/10 of an acre, as was pointed out, but that's versus impacting 8/10 of an acre on the other site, and they will be complying with all state, federal, and local requirements. The project will occur solely on, this is from your document, 1850. It's not going to adversely affect public health, safety, or welfare, not going to adversely affect conservation of fish and wildlife. The proposed project will not affect navigation or flow of water or shoaling, affect fishing, marine values. This is your document. It's been established on page 2122 that there's no native habitat on the spoil. And Mr. Patton was correct. We didn't mention rosary pea, but that is one of the 6 most invasive plants as identified by the Florida Pest Plant Council. I do not want to be arguing about oysters today, but this is the shot of where the oysters are found. You see there's no oysters growing on the mangrove roots. This is one of the worst parts in the creek to grow oysters. The oysters grow best, and you have county documents that establish this between the railroad grade and US 41. This is way far up the creek for oysters. If there are any live oysters, the applicants will do the right thing and relocate them. If they're all dead, we'll have a short ceremony and move on with things. Kayaking, yes, this is part of the Blue Waste system. If this were the only entrance into that backwater area, then I wouldn't be here today. But there's a second entrance. You can see the kayaks in this photograph. You can enter through here. None of that's being taken away. If you look at the bottom here, there's some pink areas. Each one of those pink areas is a cove that can only be only entered in one way. There's one way in and one way out. And that's exactly what this will be. And the way I look at it is this is going to be basically open to the public during high tide, nature museum. You can come in and see the needle rush display and the mangrove display and look for birds. And instead of going out through the side door, you go back out through the front door. The Planning Commission. I really didn't want to get into this, but the Planning Commission, the motion that the Planning Commission made was the mover said she couldn't remember a similar swap, that the applicant knowingly purchased the property in its current state, which I'll grant you, and that the county and community would get a raw end of the deal. We specifically asked the planning staff to clarify what specific, there was no mention during the Planning Commission meeting, there was no mention of any of the specific policies so the first finding is that it's not consistent with the intent, goals, objectives, policies, guiding principles, and programs of the comprehensive plan. Not a single one was mentioned by the Planning Commission. They had this weak motion. When questioned, they had to come back. The planning staff had to come back and present them with a list of findings of fact that was developed by the planning staff and the Office of County Attorney. They're not the words of the Planning Commission. They never discussed this. It took 3 minutes. And so if you look at some of these silly, how much time? 20 seconds. Some of these, it says that it's zoned in accord with it has the appropriate zoning. It clearly doesn't. So let me just say, all these people want is the same right that the people that live to the south have to build a house on this fill material that was placed there in the 1950s. And the only difference is that they want to, but that when they're done, there's going to be about 8 acres of protected land that you don't get with any of the other parcels. And I'm sorry I went over, but we're happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Okay. Any questions of staff? Any questions of the applicant? Will of the board? Any thoughts on this before I close the public hearing? Okay, then I will, if there's no questions of staff, no questions of the applicant, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing at the will of the board. Any more discussion on the matter? Commissioner Dieter, the public hearing is closed and the board is feverishly thinking. No, ma'am.
I will go ahead and move approval just to get the conversation started.
I have a motion to approve agenda item number 43 by Commissioner Dieter. Do I have a second? Motion by Commissioner Dieter on 43. I do not hear a second. Any other will of the board? Motion by Commissioner Dieter is dead on the floor. Okay. Josh, I need some guidance here. I have no motion from the board. I need some guidance here. I have no motion from the board.
So through this rezoning process, we have invited people to come in and apply for a rezoning. And so the board does need to make some kind of action on it. If the board is stuck, I don't know if it, it involves having some discussion or bringing up staff to ask some questions. I'm not really sure where, what is on the board's mind. But it seems like there might need to be more conversations or something with either the applicant or staff.
Well, thank you. I'm looking for guidance that might spur discussion on another matter. I hope not. But we're going to recess as the county commission to address 44, but we have to get through 43. So I need some discussion from this board or a motion, please.
I would just say it died due to the lack of a second. I don't know what the people can do about it. Can they revise their proposition and come back with a new proposal?
If they were willing to do that, then yes. If they were willing to kind of go back and reassess and come back, then that would be an option, but that would be on the applicant. Unless this board needs some further information from staff or something. If the board needs some further information from staff, then the board can, continue it to get that information.
No, I think the onus is on the petitioner because I'm not their business partner and it's not my job to make your deal happen. It's my job to judge your deal and make sure it's fair for all. I personally will add that I thought you had too many proponents that took up hours of our time saying pretty much nothing. And I thought Jono Miller, a well-respected guy, did a good job, but now he knows how we feel because he's usually on the other side and brings all the people to persecute us. So now it was your turn in the barrel, I guess. So I don't know what the people can do. The driveway is probably a problem. I take a look at it and I see mangroves and wetlands. So, and I would imagine, and they, picked it up inexpensively because probably the last guy couldn't build on it. That's all I got to say.
Commissioner Ziegler.
Josh, I mean, how does this impact item 44, right? We're on 43, and if that was to not be approved or move forward, how does that impact 44?
Either way, 44 will move forward. This is a rezoning, so it has certain rezoning criteria, and the next item has its own criteria. So it would be two separate hearings.
Commissioner Hines, Commissioner Mayo.
It's always great to have a public hearing, and you look out in the audience, and being here for 36 years and being 70 years old, I know almost everybody in the crowd. There's John Koda, who represented me one time. There's Jonathan Cole, who was my teaming partner in my old life. There's Jono Miller and I, who have gotten on some missions together. This is different, to say the least, and it makes it awkward. I don't think anybody up here would ever make people build in a wetland. I don't believe they'd ever get the permits to build there. But I don't know the details of that wetland. On the other hand, I got to tell you, that driveway concerns me. Felt a little better when we called Jono back up here, and I had the question, and I told him he had, 44 seconds left, and because there's no way you would have a well and a septic field and a reserve field on that. But somehow they've managed to cover the expense to bring in water and sewer. Still a long driveway. I don't know if it's going to be, we'll see in the next one, whether it's culvert pipes or a bridge. I saw all sorts of documents put in. I'm just not intending to be any sort of magician here and make the alternate motion. So we're stuck unless the petitioner, and I am talking to that clock in the back of the room. We're stuck, my fellow commissioners, unless the petitioner, through their attorney, wants to come up with something as an alternative, bring in the other piece of land, start stipulating absolutely no other buildings, ask for a continuance. I mean, I'm done with my discussion.
Commissioner Hines?
Well, let me hear what Mr. Koda's getting ready to say, and then maybe I'll think one way or another what I say.
Thank you. Commissioners. As prompted by Commissioner Mayo, my clients will in fact stipulate to this being a single-family residence. They have no intention of building any multifamily units or building a single family and then coming back later.
Talk into the mic, please,
I'm
sir.
sorry. What I said was that my clients will stipulate that this is going to be a single-family project, a single-family residence, one living dwelling, no multifamily, and no subsequent requests for multifamily on the property. Unless there's something else that my clients wish to add to that, I don't know what else I can offer to facilitate some discussion and a vote.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Dieter.
I think that, this we can't have, where we're going to have Mr. Dent in the audience yell from his chair or wave, and I think the thing died today. I think they need to repropose it at a later date and come back. We don't negotiate this way. It's not a conference room, it's a board table.
Is that a motion?
Yes, so I would move that that this issue is dead, and if they want to revive it, they've heard our feelings, and they should file a new petition and come back on another day.
For clarification, it's a motion to deny rezone petition number 19-04?
Correct.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Dieter, seconded by Commissioner Hines. Commissioner Dieter, would you care to speak to your motion for the denial of the rezone petition?
Well, I'm trying to be fair to both sides, but, we've spent hours and hours on this already today, and we can't get in the position of negotiating from the board table, so I think it's a perfectly reasonable motion. We're willing to look at it again, but not today, so.
Commissioner Hines, would you care to comment to your second?
I'll give you a little thoughts on this, maybe help the petitioner or just overall. For someone who grew up in this area and have been up and down Shackett Creek many, many times in boats, and I don't know anyone ever envisioned, at least maybe in my lifetime, that these parcels would be something that could be developed. Now, Mr. Miller puts up a picture from the 40s and 50s that show fill up there and actually a road coming on down that area. So this will be, the beginning of a multiple events. So the parcel to the north will be the next. Then the parcel on the other side of Laurel Road, which is owned by somebody else, will be the next. Then the parcel above that will be the next. And then you're going to have this in South Venice, in the areas where you have uplands, that if you can go over wetlands to get to them, these little, what you think are islands that are privately owned, that are come part of your property through a legal description, are now potentially something that can be developed. Now, I asked the question about the septic and the well and all this, and they said, no, we're going to run lines out there. Okay, if, you know, if that's possible, but you know, I'm still with the split zoning on this parcel on such a small piece, and I can't believe I'm saying this publicly, but if you know, you do not want to destroy a wetland. I'm the one that voted. I'm the only person that voted against the Whole Foods to stop the destruction of that existing wetland. But right along Albee Road, where all the water and sewer is, where you look back at the letter to Bill Merrill, he was asking a question about a dock going out to Shackett Creek and building homes up along the road. The fact that it's a wetland, I don't like that. But I would prefer that than this is going to cause throughout all of Sarasota County. You'll see purchases of little fill islands and these types of requests. Now, the split zoning and whether Sarasota County made a mistake when we laid our zoning over this property, I don't know. I'm struggling with this because they bought the property. Does it have, one of our requirements under our zoning code is, does it have a current use under its current plan? Yes, they can use that. They could probably get a dock there. They can use it for a camp. So it has a use, but I don't know that it really was envisioned to have a home out there, at least any time when our zoning came on. So that's where I'm struggling with this. This is not an easy one. So maybe if petitioner had some other ideas or some other thoughts, but that's all I have.
Okay, anything further from the board? Commissioner Ziegler.
Yeah, no, I appreciate a lot of what Charles or Commissioner Hines mentioned. I agree with. I mean, the split zoning was an issue for me, but it's just such a weird piece of property. I'm not necessarily sure what's going on there, but and I think that the people that presented, it was more about the personalities and the personal relationships than it was diving into the legitimacy of the project. That was kind of an issue with me. I mean, I think Jono did a pretty good job going into the details. I would have rather maybe doubled his time. But I'm just not convinced. I mean, I'm just not there on this. That's my problem. That's kind of where I'm at.
Okay, anything further from the board?
Mr. Chairman, I just
All
have
right,
one
Commissioner
thing.
Mayo.
It's not relevant to the to exactly the zoning or anything, but I just no matter how this vote goes today, and it looks like it's going to be a no, the freshman at Pineview, the daughter, you did a great job, and you had the Board of County Commissioners compliment you. And when I was a freshman in high school, they couldn't have got me up here in front of these scoundrels, nor could I have done such a decent job. So it's going to seem worthless right now, but it won't be worthless when you're telling your kids 15, 20 years from now that you stood up for what you believed in.
Commissioner Mayo, to be fair, I think she would actually do better than you right now.
I would agree.
Okay. Anything further from the board on this? All right. I'm going to call the question. I have a motion by Commissioner Dietert, seconded by Commissioner Hines, for the denial of rezone petition number 19-04. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Chair votes aye, passes 5-0. Okay, in the interest of a full process here, we are going to recess as the Board of County Commissioners, and we are going to convene as and sit as the Water Navigation Control Authority to address 44, agenda item number 44, to adopt a resolution regarding WNCA Major Work Permit application number 2016-137265-RW for the construction of a private driveway and culverted bridge crossing on property located at 851 Albee Farm Road in Nokomis. And Mr. Byrne, I believe you're going to get us started, sir.
Yes. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Howard Berna with Sarasota County Planning and Development Services. I'm the manager of environmental permitting, and I have filled out a speaker's card. This major work permit, I should say, before the meeting, I did hand out some of the email public comments we received since the board packet was prepared, and a copy has been given to the clerk. I've also put in a copy of a drainage culvert analysis that was left out of the packet. This helped answer the question about the whether the single culvert design was appropriate, and this did answer that. And I'll pass that down if you'd like to take a look at that. The applicants may choose to discuss that a little further. It's important to also, from a housekeeping standpoint, this item has been long coming to you. It's been prepared a number of times in the past, and I noticed today as I was preparing for the discussion that on page 7, there's an error where it said this was advertised in the Sarasota Herald Tribune on April 25th, when indeed it was advertised on September 3rd for this hearing today. Just wanted to let you know. The other thing that is very important, and not sure that it may have come across in the last presentation, but I'm going to read a statement that was in the staff report regarding an attachment that was in this packet. The zoning administrator issued a letter of determination on March 7th, 2016 regarding permitted use in the OUC zone district related to the subject parcel, which stated where a lot or parcel is zoned in part as OUC and the balance is any residential district, no permanent structure shall be located on that part zoned OUC. And that is why these two are tied together in a sense that the rezone would be required in order for them to have a permanent structure. So the comment about having a dock, they may not be able to have a dock on this site without rezoning the property. So there's a little bit of a concern about that. So the ability for the applicants to develop the site and have permanent accessory structures, such as what is being proposed today, or perhaps a dock structure in the future, is dependent on the approval of the rezone. So I'm going to go through my presentation to give you some information about this WNCA permit, and we'll see where we land on this. At this point in the day, I think you all know very well where we're at, so I'm going to go pretty quickly through some of these slides. Laurel Road, Albee Farm, Shake Creek. This is a 2019 aerial of the property. The proposal that we're looking at for the major work permit is down here, the crossing where there was a gap in this area. I'm going to show some historic slides, some of which we've seen before, some maybe not. This is a rather blurry image of 1948. This pale white area is the area that Mr. Miller pointed out, referenced as Salt Turn. You can understand why someone may have believed that was a developed area. I'm going to back out a little bit in the 1948 to give you some context as to what was happening back in the day. And you'll see that this tidal marsh area signature on this property, Albee Farm Road hadn't been put in yet. It runs along this section line. And what you also see on this map is continuous wetland habitats and tidal marshes to the south along the Shake Creek system. By 1957, the aerial shows what has transpired in the general area, and you start to see on the subject parcel a connection from Laurel Road and the filling that transpired. And also to the south, you see those neighborhoods starting to do that dredge and fill activity back in the 1950s, establishing those neighborhoods and canals. Some of the roadways on the opposite side were installed, but the home sites hadn't yet come into play. I may be speculating at this point, but I think Mr. Miller pointed out that what they would normally do is set aside a boundary and then come back at some later date and backfill this area. So it may have been an intent at some point that this entire wetland area might have been filled. But the 1970s came along, and there are some rules and regulations that come with the Clean Water Act and the importance of protecting wetlands. So by 1974, that area that we saw in the 1957 map that had continuous fill, that little gap that we're talking about, and is the area in question for this major work permit, was opened up. In the 1974 area, you can also see a roadway coming. There was still drivable access from Laurel Road onto this patch of land, this fill. The tidal marsh still present. You see that area that looked like it may have been disturbed in the 1948 area, that white patch, is no longer so glaringly white. You also see that the neighborhoods, there's still not any home sites yet being constructed in 1974 nearby. By 1986, that roadway from Laurel Road is not quite obvious, but there's still a connection from Laurel Road, and that little gap is still present in the 86. By 1995, there was a drainage easement established, that a stormwater drainage easement that was executed, and by 1995 severed that connection from Laurel Road and allowed for equalization between the Shaked Creek system and the tidal marsh. And so that now has created effectively an island out of this portion of the property. You've probably seen this version. The subject property is highlighted in orange boundaries. The blue lines represent the mean high water line on this site. And you'll see that although there's mean high water line, the elevations are still such that all of this area, essentially to the foot of Albee Farm Road, is wetlands. And I've highlighted that, colorized the area that is wetland on this property for your view. To also make the point that the area that they're seeking to gain access to by building a driveway and this culverted crossing is upland habitat, or upland area, I should say. It's not, there is no native habitat on this spoil island, as I think Mr. Miller mentioned, an arboretum of exotic trash. There's a wide range of nuisance invasive species that are out here, and there is no comprehensive plan designated protected native upland habitat on this spoil island. But this community flood zone map, which is part of our GIS system, highlights the AE zone, the flood zone, in the green shading, and you'll notice that the area that they're seeking to build on is outside of that flood zone. So the proposal for the major work permit is twofold. There's the crossing here to the left, and there's some fill associated with stepping down off of Albee Farm Road and getting down to the berm along this southern portion of the property. And so there's a little bit of fill here, a little bit, it's 4,300 square feet total in red. And then there's an open water area of impacts, and I'll show in the next slide, related to the construction of the culverted crossing. The 621 square feet is quite comparable to, and in fact, in many cases, far less than the preempted area that many single-family homeowners are allowed for their dock construction on their private property or associated with their private property. I should mention that the applicants own the submerged lands in this case. So they actually own the lands upon which they're seeking to fill. The proposal is for two parallel vinyl seawalls installation in orange that run 90 feet. They cross the gap from one point to the other. The island is out here on the left. The gap between the water, the open water from mean high to mean high, is roughly 32 feet of a span. In the proposal is a culvert that's elliptically 38 inches by 60 inches. And that's what that report was mentioning would be sufficient to maintain the flow of water through this area. Now, there are no seagrasses in this area. There's an old remnant oyster bed that consists predominantly of old dead shells. Oftentimes you can have oysters populate these areas because if they were once suitable for oysters, sometimes oysters will come back and populate those areas. So in the draft approval resolution, there's a special stipulation, specific stipulation, that this area would be reviewed for any living oysters, and those would be relocated outside of the footprint of the construction. That's a typical remediation if you have oysters within a footprint of construction. And we've done that in the past for dock construction, for example, to relocate living oyster materials to a comparable elevation in the nearby area. So that is in the draft approval resolution. The proposal is for a 16-foot wide spread between those seawalls. They will have a concrete cap. There will be guardrails at the top of that, and it will have that concrete pipe running in between. The drivable surface is intended to be 10-foot wide at that point, and that accommodates some shoulder space on the bridge. And that, again, showing 10-foot wide drivable space. As part of the mitigation associated with the impacts for this 90-foot stretch, the applicants have gone through, actually I have another slide about the mitigation, I'll come back to that, but they are proposing mangroves to be planted along the face of those seawalls. Regarding some of the issues we have to consider for WNCA major work permits, navigation, there's very, very shallow water conditions, in part because of the presence of those oyster shells. But you see very shallow water depths, less than a foot at mean high. And when you do that conversion, when we're at mean low water, this area is standing above, you see the mud and the shells. So it's not an area that's suitable for motorized vessel use. This is, by WNCA standards, not a site where we would allow for anyone to motorboat in back behind this island. The water depth just doesn't cut it. There's a requirement in the code for maintaining a 1-foot clearance at mean low water. Well, we don't have it. You'd have to have a hover boat that hovers over the land to maintain that clearance. So I don't think that they're interested in doing that. This is a view of that crossing looking to the northeast. And at this point, it was a relatively low end tide. And you can see the old oyster shells here and mud flat back behind. So it is very shallow. It'd be limited access for anyone on a kayak or paddleboard. Now, there's tidal events where I could equally show you a high tide event where someone could paddle through this area, but it is relatively shallow. Now, the driveway itself is that old berm that I showed on the 1957 aerial. Back when we got started on this in 2016, the owners were very actively working on removal of nuisance invasives from that berm area. They were looking to improve the site for their future development. And so back in 2016, this was after a fair amount of effort to remove nuisance invasive. There's still some Australian pines in this picture, but this cabbage palm here is this cabbage palm on the right in March 2020. And you can see that if left unmanaged, these areas, the aggressive growth of those nuisance invasives like Australian pine are coming back. And so this area would benefit from management. Turning around 180 degrees and maybe walking a little bit closer to Albee Farm Road, this is the view back in September. Again, the applicants were actively removing Brazilian peppers along this stretch, and you can see that by March, with them doing some other things and not aggressively attacking this, those Brazilian peppers have come back with a vengeance. The area near Albee Farm Road, where the wetland is, where I mentioned that wetland, large lobe of wetland impact shown in red, that area is essentially shown here by this silt fence, is this portion of the property. When you look at the overall site and you look at what is being impacted, it's only about 1% of the total parcel property. It's a very small amount of impact to gain the access that they're seeking. This is a view from the Albee Farm Road Bridge looking off toward the west, and this is the mangrove fringe shoreline, and you can see some of those Australian pines poking up through there. That would be that berm area, and it's my understanding that the applicants have no interest in trimming these mangroves down to 6 feet or hedging them. They've verbally committed to protecting them and not trimming them. You may want to ask for a little more information, or they may speak to it in their presentation. But what the owners on the opposite side of the creek or this water body will see is essentially what they see today, is the mangroves minus some Brazilian pepper, minus some Australian pines. And then, excuse me, the home site would be placed out here much further. You can't quite see on this image where that would be. That's under a totally separate permitting process that goes through a building permit, and the home site itself is not part of this major work permit decision. The major work permit is related to the impacts at the elevations associated with the fill for the driveway and the filling of that 32-foot gap or the 90-foot seawalls that I mentioned. They have gone through the process of utilizing the Unified Mitigation Assessment Methodology, the UMAMs, for determining wetland impacts, and they are also going above and beyond what the state has required for mitigation by adding 60 mangroves along the faces of those seawalls to compensate and soften those hardened shorelines, which is a county, typical county standard for softening shorelines that are proposed to be hardened. I should mention also that the applicants have obtained their Army Corps of Engineer permits for this design. They have obtained their DEP permits for this design, and what they were seeking today is for the county's approval for this design. So with respect to the WNCA permit approval criteria, in the staff report, in your board packet, Table 1 highlighted a number of permit approval criteria and balanced out the assessment. There's not really a lot of these that are contradictory to an approval for this presentation. So with that, I'll end my presentation if you have any questions. Has a presentation? Did you have a presentation that needed to come up? A PowerPoint? No. Okay. I was just going to help you get it.
I was, Mr. Chair, just going to comment on Mr. Vernon pointed out that because the previous zoning rezone was denied pursuant to the county zoning code, you cannot permit a permanent structure in the OUC property, so that this request would not be permitted to be granted. So you may want to inquire, I was to see what the applicant's intent was to go forward with a full-blown hearing at this time in light of the prior ruling of the BCC. We're in a different board right now. We're in the WNCA, but the BCC denied the zoning request, which would prohibit a granting of this accessory structure, which would include the culvert bridge.
Mr. Cole, I'm sure you heard that. You're within 15 feet of our council. I do have two public comment cards on this, so I want to be very sensitive to the process of this. But Mr. Cole, do you understand what was said?
Mr. Chairman, can I have
yes,
a
sure,
question for Rick?
Yeah,
I
Commissioner
don't want to short circuit at all the petitioner's hearing or Jonathan Cole's, but when he's done, and they may be going through with this in the event there's a successor petition before us and they've got this done. But just so we know, or I know, when he's done with his presentation, are we going to be voting on this?
If he requests the full hearing, I think then the board should vote on it, but I think the board cannot grant it because of our zoning code and the prior ruling by the BCC.
Okay.
Commissioner Mayo.
So just for my own dull mind, he's going to give us a presentation. He can request the entire presentation. He can request we vote on it, but you're saying we can't vote on it.
I'm saying the basis for a denial would be that it's inconsistent with our zoning code, which does not allow an accessory structure on the OUC property if it's currently zoned OUC and residential. That was outlined in the memo, and I think it's the board could have other basis for denial as well, but that is certainly one basis for denial. And
well, the chairman is trying to give the fairest hearing of all that he can, so I'm going to stop.
Yeah, Mr. Cole, not eating into your 20-minute time, but are you hearing this?
Yeah, just one quick question. Are you talking about the accessory structure on the site, or are you talking about a culvert pipe?
I'm talking about the culvert bridge as a permanent accessory structure.
So a culvert pipe, it's basically a culvert pipe with an end wall on it that are in driveways all over the county. I would assume in that same zoning, you're saying are not allowed in that zoning?
I'm saying that a culvert bridge is an accessory structure, and it would not be allowed in an OUE area, which this is. As a result, and the zoning request to have that changed to an RSF was just denied by the BCC.
Right.
We're now sitting as the WNCA,
Right.
but that was a finding.
Okay, I don't know if there was some misunderstanding. Okay, well,
Mr. Cole, it's real easy as far as the process that I'm looking for is if you want your 20 minutes, you got it.
yes, please.
Then go ahead, sir.
Okay. Hopefully this one won't be as awkward as the last one, but we'll see. We've sort of gone through most of this stuff. Again, my name is Jonathan Cole. I'm with Giffords Webster Engineers. I did the drainage study on this and the actual culvert pipe design. I'd like to just kind of go back through some of those aerials because the aerials really tell the history of this thing, and it might shed a few more things as far as why they would like to get access to this existing upland. On the screen, as you know, in 1948, the 48 aerial was basically just a big wetland area. We all know that. Sometime before 1957, Shackett Creek, as well as the canal to the south, was excavated, and the spoils we know were used to create the upland perimeter berms around this property. But unlike the neighbors to the south, which we talked about, this internal land was never filled. Okay, based on the 1957 aerial, there was an upland access almost around the perimeter, except it appears that the only cut at that time was up there by the bridge by Laurel Road, right in this area here. There's a very small cut there, but the rest of this access, there was no cuts in it. At some point after 1957 and before 1974, the north-south section, or the westerly section, appears to have been widened with some additional fill placed there. It may have been part of the dredging associated with Cowpen Slough. At any rate, the additional fill explains why the north-south fill is more substantial than the berm leading from Albee Farm Road. So the north-south fill is this area right here. Can you all see that on the screen? Slide it up. How about that? Okay, so this is a little bit wider than this area here. And you'll notice that that cut that used to be right there by the bridge is no longer there, and there actually is a driveway going down to that area. So that was filled in, that upper cut, and again, it's pretty obvious that there was a drive or an access there to allow access to the area with some sort of driveway from Laurel Road. But when they filled that northerly gap, maybe to allow drainage from the inside area, the internal area, a cut was also excavated, a small cut, and that's the topic of today or tonight. It was also excavated right down in this area here, probably to allow drainage to this area here because this was a driveway or a filled area. Then the county improved Laurel Road. That project, as part of that project, they bought a drainage easement in 1988. Okay, that drainage easement I have with me, but it was specifically for drainage. It's a specific drainage easement that was purchased from the property. And it was basically a square area where they were allowed to install drainage. So in addition to just being a drainage easement, what really happened was that that drainage easement, in effect, also cut, go to today's pictures, here's the 86 aerial. The easement was offered in 88. They had an access here all along. Here's that cut, and they made a big, relatively large cut, completely wiping out the driveway that was there at that time. Okay, so that basically, it's not landlocked, but it's basically made that parcel waterlocked because the other small cut that was made in the interim prior to this was not filled in. So this request really is to reestablish an access from a county road to this upland parcel that was really taken away as part of the Laurel Road drainage easement, because right now they have no good access to it where they used to have an access. So what we've proposed was to design a driveway to the absolute minimum standards to have the least amount of impact that would give the owners re-access back to their property. Now, the good news is that building the residential driveway along the majority of that southern upland area that we're talking about, and yeah, it's 600 feet long, but the majority of it doesn't have any substantial impacts to wetlands. Okay, it's a small portion that's being impacted. Obviously, it avoids some wetlands. That's why we're here before you today. Specifically, the biggest area would be to restore that drainage cut that was put in there when they took the other one out, to fill that back in with a culvert, not a bridge, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And in order to get access back up to Albee Farm Road, there's some small impacts there. Let me talk about the crossing concepts that's been kicked around with this thing. First, a bridge was considered for the cut area, and that's some of maybe the misinformation or the misunderstanding that a bridge was considered that to span the whole thing. The problem with a bridge is that there's considerable impacts to the wetlands in reality due to the bridge footprint. In addition to mobilizing the long piles that have to be driven down to build a bridge, mobilizing the concrete slabs to build the deck on that thing, the noise to build a bridge with pile drivers can be very disruptive. And when it's all done, you're going to have a bridge. You're going to be looking at a bridge there, which is kind of hard to disguise. So we didn't like the bridge concept, even though I know it was kicked around early on. So that structure, which would be considered a structure, I can certainly understand the earlier comment about building a structure. So the next option was to build a culvert. Culverts are all over the county. We do hundreds, if not thousands of them. Everybody has a driveway culvert just about, and this is essentially what it is a driveway culvert. A conventional culvert that's underneath your driveway has normally what's called a mitered end section. It tapers down to the land. It's sloped down for safety purposes. The problem with the mitered end sections in this particular case is that that also adds impact to the wetlands. So how can we cut that back? Well, we felt there was a better way to minimize impacts, and that was to build a vinyl wall, the closest we can possibly build it, putting in 16 feet of an equivalent 48-inch round, 4-foot round pipe. that would allow for vehicles to access that small area. And still have a little sliver along the side end, so we can get a fire truck through there, and still have a little bit of a shoulder and some guardrails on each side of it for that crossing only. So that's the design we're proposing. Again, it allows for the smallest impact possible to get access to that land that was cut off by the Laurel Road project. As was mentioned, as part of the mitigation, they've exceeded the mitigation requirements. They're proposing to install mangroves in front of that, which will help hide that wall. You'll hardly even see the thing. It's only going to be a little 4-foot-high wall, basically. We also conducted a drainage study, I think that was handed out earlier. The purpose of that drainage study was to make sure that whatever we're doing there won't impact the tidal flushing or the flow behind it in that whole inside area. Well, the good news is it won't. In fact, we can probably fill that entire area in and just put a wall there. And the reason is because that county-owned drainage area that was cut as part of Laurel Road, there's such a large area to do tidal flushing in there and allow kayaks, by the way, that we could probably build this thing with just 2 walls or just fill it and build a driveway on it. But we wanted to put at least some sort of flushing pipe in there that would help things out just for tidal flushing. So we suggested what's called an elliptical reinforced concrete pipe to allow that flushing to happen. Finally, as mentioned, the area is so shallow that it really is not navigable, especially at low tide. You'd have to hike across the thing. So it's not really a navigable waterway in the classic sense of the word. So the county uses 9 criteria when they evaluate this. It's in your board packet. And basically, would the proposed project have a detrimental effect on the use of the jurisdictional areas for navigation, transportation, recreation, or other public purposes? Would the proposed project restrict the use of jurisdictional areas? Would the proposed project adversely alter the flow or tidal currents of the jurisdictional areas? Would the project adversely affect long-term water quality, erosion control, increase erosion, shoaling channels, or formation of stagnant pockets likely to collect debris? Would the project adversely affect the conservation of wildlife, marine life, and natural resources? Would it adversely affect the natural beauty or recreation opportunities upon jurisdictional areas? Would it affect the uplands surrounding or directly affected by the plan or development? Would the project adversely affect the public health, safety, welfare? And finally, would the siting criteria with technical standards, would it meet the siting criteria with technical standards pursuant to the section 54.556? Without going into all the minutia of that, it's all in your board packet. The staff looked at it. In my opinion, the answer to all those questions is no. It won't have any significant long-term impact by building a driveway to this cut-off piece of property out there. I think the staff agrees with my opinion. Matter of fact, I kind of worked on this thing with the applicant to try to minimize as much as we could for this. There are a couple things in that column where they say, well, it's not likely that it's going to, actually the majority says it's not likely going to impact it. There's 2 others where they talk about a tidal event or a storm event that exceeds the capacity of the proposed culvert and cause temporary retention of water within a tidal march, given the low elevations of the proposed driveway. I'm sorry, I'm speed speaking. Driveway's gonna be relatively low, maybe around 3.5. Going over my little culvert, to me about elevation 4. It is crushed concrete, by the way. It's not a poured concrete. The idea is to have some sort of impervious there, but still strong enough for trucks. There may be times when that driveway experiences some floods at an extremely high tide or a hurricane, like a lot of long driveways are out there. But it doesn't pose any risks to the general public. It's a private driveway to get to a piece of land out there that you can't get to right now. So, and they say that the applicants have provided an engineering report that indicates the size of the culvert is sufficient to not adversely alter the water flow or tidal currents, and that's what that other thing that I did there. So, we're trying to do all the right thing with this thing. Yes, there's some impacts to wetlands, as was mentioned. Very minimal impacts, and the mitigation that's offered on that exceeds the state requirements. And as a staff report says, this project has demonstrated significant reduction of impacts to these native habitats in comparison to a potential development impacts to the area of a property currently zoned RSF. So in other words, it's de minimis. Compared to a residential house, it's not that much, and yet they are still proposing to offset those impacts for this driveway construction. So the bottom line, I think, is we've met the goals. of minimizing impacts as much as humanly feasible with a driveway, while still providing the access to the upland property so he can get to his property regardless of what it's zoned. Maybe he wants to go out there and fish. Maybe he wants to go out there and have a picnic. I don't know. But that access will be restored when it was cut off by the county project as part of that drainage easement, when that access was lost. So, again, we're not asking to fill wetlands for a house. We're simply asking to re-establish access to that existing upland area. As mentioned before, they have all their other environmental permits. They have FDEP for this. They have Army Corps. This is the last thing in order to build a driveway. So you know, as discussed earlier, to go through FDEP and Army Corps, all those environmental issues that were raised, they put you through the ringer. I know too, I've been doing this for 30 years. They've been responded to and they've been resolved. So again, this is the last approval to be able to build a small driveway with minimal impact to access that property. And with that, I'll close my presentation.
Commissioner Mayo.
Yeah, Jonathan, let's take just 20 seconds. No, I stopped the clock. I just have a.
Yeah, I understand. Commissioner Mayo, I'll get to you, John.
I just stopped. Now I look even more silly, but take 20 seconds with me. Put it back on the wolf, where the north-south road to Laurel is complete. Maybe it's a year back. Where was the easement that these folks granted the county?
Yeah, it was right in here. It's a square block right in here.
What? Okay, thank you. I just sit here wondering why in the
we had a
world.
hard time finding it too. And a matter of fact, if you look at this one.
No, that's okay. I just am sitting here wondering why in the world anybody would give an easement to cut off their driveway from Lowell Road. But
Good question. And when I read the easement, it is just a drainage easement.
wow. Okay, thank you, buddy.
Mr. Cole, you do have 7 minutes left, and it appears Mr. Miller would like to speak. Did you want to use that time?
Sure, he's welcome to.
Thank you. So just building on what he said, or what you said, Commissioner Mayo, somebody should have had a better attorney. I mean, when they said we want to cut through your driveway access to improve flushing, somebody should have said, yeah, where's our bridge? But apparently they didn't do that. So they denied. We have this is Mr. Cole's, but as you see in this, there was not only a driveway, but there was a turnaround at the end. Now, it's inconceivable to me that somebody hadn't conceived of or anticipated developing that at some point in the future. So through action, the ignorance of some prior owners and the action of the county, access to this highland had been cut off. And at this point, based on your prior action, they have no right to build a structure on that property. But as Mr. Cole said, do they have the right to go out to their property and camp or remove exotic vegetation or do anything else without getting their feet wet? So if they want to take equipment out there to start clearing with something other than a pole saw, can they do that? So let me just read you. I want to emphasize a couple of things. They have the Corps and DEP permits, but let me just read. This is from page 1815 in your report, and I'll put it down here so everybody can see it. This is based on the public interest test for this project. The proposed project should not adversely affect public health, safety, or welfare on the property of others. The project will occur solely on the property owned by the applicant and should not affect any surrounding property owners. The proposed project will not adversely affect the conservation of fish and wildlife in their habitats. The recommendation from FWC have incorporated into the permit, and the proposed mitigation will enhance the existing wetland habitat. The proposed project will not adversely affect navigation or the flow of water or cause harmful erosion or shoaling, nor will it adversely affect fishing or recreational values or marine productivity in the vicinity of activity. The impacts will occur to wetlands due to the installation of bridge pilings, which is a prior approach, and the driveway, but the applicant has proposed sufficient mitigation to offset the proposed impacts. So I'm not an attorney, but if you can go out to your property to camp or use it or modify the land independent of building a structure, it seems like the findings of your own staff have argued or have suggested that this is an appropriate use that should be permitted, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Miller? Any questions for the applicant? Any questions for staff? Okay, I do have two public requests for comment here. The first being, I do have an online registration for remote testimony from Steve Alley. Mr. Steve Alley, are you on the line? Mr. Steve Alley, are you on the line?
He's not.
Okay, thank you. Then in the chamber, I have a request to speak card from Michelle Martini. Ms. Michelle Martini, are you here? Okay. Online remote testimony's been addressed. Any written correspondence has been provided to this board and made part of the record. Madam Clerk, do you have any more cards? Is there anyone in this chamber that would like to speak on agenda item number 44? Sir? Sir, please state your name and that you'll sign a card after you leave the podium.
Yes. Steve Gebeloff. The culvert that I spoke to about earlier is closing off a 30-foot opening there. And I live directly across from it, and I can observe the flow in and out of there. And that southern 30-foot opening, more or less, is the major opening to that piece of property. The opening up by the bridge on Laurel Road, and you can see it if you can get back to it. Some of the photographs that Mr. Miller submitted. That opening is almost closed off by a sandbar. And the opening itself is much narrower than the opening on the southern side. And I believe that the bridge on Laurel Road is contributing to that sandbar, but I'm not a hydrologist, I don't know, but that appears to be what's going on there. And the 8 years that I've lived there and boated there, that sandbar is getting larger and larger. And it's getting almost impossible to get into the property from the northern side. So if you're going to close off the southern side, and the northern side is closing off naturally, there's going to be a big problem there. Now also, that culvert is supposed to have an 8-inch grading on it. To prevent manatees from entering there. But what's going to happen is when you get the bad weather, when you get the storms, when you get a lot of debris, that culvert and that 8-inch grading is going to clog up. And it's going to clog up at just the wrong time when nobody is there to do anything about it. And that's going to cause the property to flood. And Mr. Miller had a very interesting on the applicant's website, very interesting historical view of that property, and he lamented that these dikes were put around these properties that closed off water entering the property, and it actually destroyed the whole ecosystem of all the properties around there. Now, if you build this concrete paved, half concrete, half crushed stone driveway, and if that property along the creek ever gets developed, and that culvert clogs up, you're actually creating a dike around that property, and you're going to create the situation that Mr. Miller says destroyed all these ecosystems. If the applicants really want to, are really concerned with the ecology of the property, they should take that spoil from those two berms on the perimeter of the property and put that up in the northeast corner of the property to fill in that property and build on that northeast corner without affecting the whole 15-acre site. Because what they are doing, they're putting a road in there, and I'm sure they're going to come back to develop that swap piece that they want to do there, they're going to be enclosing the entire property in an impermeable berm that's going to actually destroy the property, not improve the ecology of that property. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Anyone further in the chamber that wishes to speak that did not fill out a request to speak card? I am seeing none. Any questions from this board related to applicant or staff? I'm closing this public hearing.
I got a question for
yes.
the attorney.
Commissioner Hines.
I don't know if this is a hint to the applicant or not, but we allowed them, and I think rightfully so, give the presentation and the ideas about this. We voted on the zoning and said no. County attorney's opinion is this application's moot at this situation, in this matter. But if the petitioner pushes us to do a vote, and is there a downside to them to have a negative? I don't know how we could give a positive vote. You've already said we can't. So if we give a negative vote, is there an effect on any future applications or timing or anything that we might just be better off to say?
You're talking about whether we would have a right to file for renewal or a reapplication after. I don't believe there's a time limit under the WNCA as there is, but let me just.
And is there any prejudice or precedent that's set that if something and this comes back later under a rezone, that a negative vote on this today would have any impact on them later?
Well, it may be persuasive to the board later on to have prior ruling under, unless there's new facts that are presented later on. That would be something different.
Thank you.
Mr. Berna, were you trying to get my attention? Mr. Berna, were you trying to get my attention?
I was just checking to see if there was a timing. I thought there was.
Okay. Any further questions for staff or the applicant? Okay. Seeing none, now I'll close the public hearing and the will of the board.
Mr. Chairman?
We just indicated whether or not there would be any rebuttal, but.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
From the public hearing.
I'm sorry. I'm going to reopen the public hearing. My apologies. The applicant has 5 minutes of rebuttal. If you'd like to take it, sir, you're more than welcome.
Kidding.
My apologies.
Couple things all more minor. Just to respond to the prior concerns that were raised by one of the residents. Yes, we do have a manatee grading here. Not sure we really need it, but we put it in there because we did. 8-inch grading will not plug. It's a normal grading width. On a lot of the mitered end sections you see when you drive home, it's a standard grate. In fact, the north inlet is wider and deeper than this small cut in the south area. It's ample to easily flush or allow flow into that without backing water up. The county easement that you already have there, that entire area, it's 104 feet by 190 feet. So you have of course you have the right, but you also have the right responsibility to keep that easement clean. And but even right now, we went out, the survey went out and topoed that area. It is ample for the area. So.
Commissioner Hines.
Just curious. Do you know what the consideration for that easement was? What was paid for it?
I don't. Let me just check here. In consideration of a sum of $1.
Well, that's put in there, but
I know.
guess that's.
I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't know if you know.
I didn't
I'll
run
explain
the
why
math
when
as
we're
far
done.
as the doc stamp and like that.
Yeah, it'd be too much math for us.
Too much for me too.
Thanks.
I've got a question.
County Attorney wants to speak.
I'm
Just
sorry.
Commissioner Dieter.
Well, I hope you're here to help, because I feel like we're about to vote on the road to nowhere, because we were told we can't even, I mean, I can't tell you how frustrating this last hour has been, where we're having presentations about things that are never going to happen, when we all have been told by you that we have to vote no on this, because you can't have a culvert on an OUC. That's what you told us at the beginning, and then we listened to 20 minutes. Why?
Well, they have a right to a hearing, and the
Even if we all know the conclusion,
and
do you realize, you know, Mark Twain said it, if that's the law, then the law's an ass.
we want to provide them full due process for both of these hearings, and we gave them an opportunity to not proceed forward in light of what the advice was. But
Jumping ahead to this moment, what do you suggest we do?
I do want to make one point in response to Commissioner Hines' question from earlier, that there actually is a one-year period for which they cannot refile. So if the board votes to deny it, if they request a full vote from the board, then they will not be able to bring it forward.
So that would mirror the same thing as the rezoning.
Correct.
1 year.
Right.
But there's a potential no vote that may carry precedent later on that I would think the petitioner wouldn't want a no vote, but that's their choice.
That would be within their discretion, but.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Mayo.
It's late. We want to get out of here. I think we got to just slow the train down for 10 seconds. And everybody in the room, there's people who aren't getting paid today. I'm not getting paid as a consultant anymore like I did for 35 years. I think everybody in the room has to pause for 2 seconds and listen very carefully to what Commissioner Hines said twice.
Wait, come on up.
I make a motion that we accept the county attorney's recommendation that there is nothing to vote on this because of the denial of the rezone, thereby not prejudicing the petitioner for later applications.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Hines, seconded by Commissioner Mayo. Commissioner Hines, would you care to speak further on it?
I think my motion encapsulates what my concern is. We struggled with this coming from a planning commission, which was a complete vote, and we couldn't even barely get a second on this. There's a lot of things going on, and my question in regards to what was paid in the consideration for that drainage easement. Somewhere along the line, prior owners on this property probably realized it wasn't developable. Laurel Road got expanded, Albee Farm Road got expanded. And when you look at that, those were takings from those properties for various easements for expansions of those roads. Yeah, I know, be quiet.
Sorry. I didn't mean that, brother.
But I'm struggling as a person that respects private property rights. And I just couldn't get there to do the rezoning part. I'm not saying that maybe in the future there's some other way to think through this, but there's some history that's missing in this. And when you get into the property appraiser's website, you can't get to the prior deeds and what was going on. We just have a couple maps from 74 and the 80s. So I'm struggling with that. So I don't know if that's an appropriate motion that I made because I see the attorney saying probably not.
Just to be clear, yeah,
County
Mr. Chair. My recommendation, my advice was that the board needed to vote to deny the request because of the previous ruling on the rezone that was denied, and because it is in an OUC and they're attempting to put in a permanent accessory structure. Now, they could have an opportunity to withdraw at this point. That would be another opportunity to achieve what I think what Commissioner Hines is trying, which is to give them an opportunity to not have a precedent set and to not be precluded from bringing any action or reapplication within the next year. But I don't think the board can do nothing at this point.
I think that's what I heard from the audience was an attempt to withdraw this part of the petition, but I can't give them legal advice what to do.
I have a motion on the floor by Commissioner Hines, seconded by Commissioner Mayo. We're getting some advice by counsel.
I don't think my motion's appropriate then based upon his advice.
Just going with this.
So I need to withdraw my motion.
Withdraw my second.
Okay. Commissioner Hines, Commissioner Mayo both withdraw their motion. The applicant, would you like 30 seconds here to?
I would like 30 seconds if possible. I need
Yes.
to understand how all this works. One of the things that I watched go from approval to denial, and then everybody felt relieved. I saw that. I see people who don't want to take the responsibility of having.
Ma'am, what's before you, let me make sure. What's before the question, what this board needs guidance from you on is, would you like to withdraw your application or not? Is that the fair question here? Would you like to withdraw your application or not and go forward for a vote?
Yes,
You'd like to withdraw your application?
yes.
Okay, do you need anything further clarification from this applicant?
No, I think that's clear on the record.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay.
I'd like to jump in there and just tell the petitioner, I knew you'd find that confusing that I moved to approve. I did not get a second, so you were dead on arrival. So it was obviously dead, and then we moved to.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Thank you. Great.
I knew that you would find that confusing.
Great, thank you. Okay, anything further on 44 from legal?
No, sir.
Anything forward regarding 44 from the board here? Okay, then we are going to recess as the Water Navigation Control Authority. We're going to reconvene as the Board of Sarasota County Commissioners. We're going to open to the public, 3-minute time limit per person, which is agenda item number 45. This time is reserved for persons desiring to comment before the board on items not scheduled for a public hearing. Persons wishing to speak at open to the public shall complete a request to speak card, including the number of the agenda item, or if not an agenda item, the topic to be addressed. This segment may include speakers deferred from the morning's open to the public segment. I do have a open to the public, Mr. Jono Miller. While Mr. Miller's making his way up here, I do have Steve Gebenloff, but I'm assuming that was you meant to put agenda item number 44? Yes. Got it. Thank you, sir. Mr. Miller.
Yes, Commissioners, I went back and listened to the Planning Commission testimony on this matter that you were just working on, and I wanted to bring to your attention that a gentleman named Rick Manning said he's a third-generation Sarasotan. He lived at 800 Bayview, which is on the other side of the creek. And he said he owned several acres at the end of Bayview since 1973. At the time he moved in, the entire peninsula from him, across from him, was considered protected wetland OUC. And this is the part I want to bring to your attention. He said, I was promised that they would have flow into my hidden bay from Shaka Creek. That did not happen. There's a beautiful home on it right now. The 12-foot culvert is not there, and it has rendered my bay dead. And he goes on from there. So I'm hoping you could direct staff or the county administrator could get in touch with Mr. Manning, find out if he has a document that says there was supposed to be flow that provided water through to his bay there, and if there is, maybe the county could pursue that somehow. If there's no documentation of it, then it's unfortunate. But he gave a very persuasive and poignant testimony, and I don't think he's brought it to your attention, so I thought I would. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other requests to speak from the public? Seeing anything further for the good of the order? Seeing none, we're adjourned.